On our way out of the brothel, he kept looking back at Ruhua upstairs. A doorman let slip the real reason she'd never accepted his money for freedom. In this place, girls don't just walk out. The madam treats top earners like property. One former star had been bought out by a rich man, then got sent back after he divorced her. Now she was a servant, cleaning tables by day, available to any customer or even the doorman by night. That was the fate waiting for any girl who tried to leave. That's when I spotted the woman wiping tables. I recognized her instantly, Wang Chongqing's ex-wife, the one from the brothel he'd married. After he divorced her, she'd crawled back here and been demoted to the lowest position. She looked up and our eyes met. Pure hatred, then fear. Before she could react, the madam appeared and slapped her across the face, screaming at her to work faster. I felt nothing for her. She'd made her choices. I handed Iron Hammer the food boxes and told him everyone controls their own fate. What you can't hold on to has no value. He immediately ripped open the box and shoved a chicken leg in his mouth. I kicked him. He grinned and said he was just following my advice about holding on to things. This guy was smarter than he pretended to be. I took him to the escort agency. Wu Xinyue's people sketched a rough portrait of the real Ruhua based on Iron Hammer's description, and I got details about his hometown to narrow the search. The agency's network covered all of Yuzhou. If the girl was alive, they'd find her. Iron Hammer noticed how the whole agency treated me. Wu Santong calling me brother, Wu Xinyue hanging on my every word. He asked what my relationship with them was. I told him Wu Santong was simultaneously my brother and my future father-in-law. He stared at me, completely confused. I brought him back to the village and showed him everything. The horse farm, the brick kiln, the construction project. His expression kept changing as he realized the scale of what I'd built. I offered him the deal. A house in the village, 5 acres. In exchange, loyalty. He understood immediately. In Tianyong City, he'd earned decent money, but never owned land or a home. What I was offering was roots, a real foundation for a life. He agreed without hesitation and promised to follow me anywhere, even through fire. I sent him with the next escort convoy to Tianyong City to collect his forged tools, then had Tian Lao Ba help him pick a house and a spot near the brick kiln for his new smithy. A mountain of captured weapons and scrap iron was waiting for him to melt down and reforge. When I finally got home, the sisters were already moving our belongings into the new house. It was finished at last. The heated brick bed had been burning non-stop since we built it. The whole bedroom was at least 5 degrees warmer than outside. You could strip down to light clothing and feel comfortable. I walked in and found both sisters bending over the bed, arranging blankets. The view from behind nearly set me on fire. Wan Qing turned first with a soft smile. Wan Qing said the room was wonderfully warm. I set down the food box from the brothel, walked over, and pulled them both close. They blushed and protested. There was still work to do. I told them it would go faster with 3 people. Wan Qing tried to resist. Wan Qing gave up immediately, threw her arms around my neck, and kissed me without warning. That's the kind of woman I loved. Wan Qing sighed, accepted her fate, and started undressing. This was our first time. I made sure it was memorable. An hour later, both sisters lay exhausted on the messy bed, sweat dripping, completely spent. I patted their legs and told them to get up and make dinner. In the kitchen, Wan Qing noticed the food box had Yihong Yuan, the brothel's name, stamped on it. She stared at me. She was skeptical until Wan Qing laughed and said if I ever did stray, it would be their fault for not satisfying me. Both sisters giggled and threatened that once Wu Xianyue joined the household, the 3 of them would take turns wearing me out so completely I'd never have energy to wander. I thought about Wu Xianyue and grinned. That girl didn't even understand how wedding nights worked. She'd probably be terrified. That evening was the last day of my 3-day deadline for Wang Chongsheng. I went to check. Just as the sun was setting, dinner time, when the whole village was indoors, I spotted a figure poking out the gate. A servant drove an ox cart out. Then they carried Wang Chongsheng onto it face down, his backside still too damaged to sit. 4 of them in total, Wang Chongsheng, 2 servants with pots and supplies on their backs, and the old cook clutching a bundle, eyes darting nervously. They'd chosen this hour deliberately, hoping to slip away unseen. I followed quietly from a distance, smiling. Wang Chongsheng was lying on the cart, whispering to his servant, asking if anyone was watching. The servant said the village was quiet, everyone eating dinner. But Wang Changxing wasn't convinced. He muttered that I wouldn't just let him leave peacefully. He knew me too well for that. He was right. Wang Changxing's group crept out at dusk, thinking nobody would notice. His servant kept reassuring him. He'd given up everything, so why would I bother with him anymore? The old fool actually believed he could start over somewhere else with his hidden cash. I followed silently through the grass. They made it to the main road and relaxed. That's when a sharp whistle cut through the night air. 5 figures appeared from the shadows and surrounded them. Wang Dinglu from Heaven's Peak, face covered, blade drawn. Wang Changxing panicked immediately, holding up a 100-tael banknote with trembling hands, begging for mercy. Wang Dinglu took one look, sliced off the hand holding the money, caught the banknote midair, and gave the order, "Kill everyone, no survivors." It was over in seconds. The servants and cook had no chance. I stepped out of the grass once the noise stopped. Wang Dingliu's men nearly charged me before he barked at them to stand down. He asked if I didn't trust them. I told him I just wanted to make sure Wang Changxing was actually dead. Couldn't sleep otherwise. I checked the cart. Multiple stab wounds, every one hitting something vital. He was thoroughly finished. Wang Dinglu found another 250 taels and banknotes plus jewelry on the body, far more than the 50 I'd promised. The bandits were thrilled. I told them to take the ox cart, the grain, everything. Burn the bodies far away where nobody would ever find them. Wang Dinglu thanked me and mentioned his boss wanted to meet. He'd heard about me wiping out the river fortress and wanted to be friends. I agreed. Tomorrow at noon, village entrance. On their way back, Wang Dingliu's group bumped into something unexpected. A band of over 20 refugees on the road, starving, barely clothed, heading toward our village. A young woman with a crutch stopped them and asked if this was the way to Siwa village. She said they'd met some escort agency people who told them the village chief was a good man and nobody went hungry there. Wang Dinglu nearly had a crisis. His cart was full of fresh corpses covered with straw, and hungry refugees were crowding around asking for food because they could smell the blood. His men grabbed the cart rails, and he whipped the ox forward before anyone looked too closely. One of his men complained later about me following them, calling it disrespectful. Wang Dinglu shut him up fast. You think a man who destroyed the entire river fortress alone is someone we can afford to disrespect? Use your head. I'd already walked far from where I dealt with the water bandits, not knowing the fear I'd left behind in the other bandit groups. Turns out, wiping them out in one swift move made quite the impression. Near the village entrance, I heard someone calling after me. I turned around and saw a group of over 20 people. A young woman explained their situation. They were refugees led here by Wu Santong's introduction. I didn't hesitate. I brought them straight to the horse farm. These people had nowhere to go, and that made them loyal. I gave them my own dinner without a second thought. The sisters started cooking big pots of porridge for everyone. The thin gruel wasn't anything special, but these people ate like it was a feast. They devoured everything. My meal, the farm workers' dinner, every last scrap of pickled vegetables. I stood there thinking, if I hadn't taken Wang Changxing's land and grabbed all that grain from the water bandit camp, I couldn't possibly feed this many starving mouths. Their leader introduced herself as Lin Xiaoxi. She told me they'd fled all the way from the border, just looking for somewhere to survive. She said they'd do any work as long as I kept them fed. Their lives would be mine. I looked them over. All able-bodied, 16 men, 6 women, for children, nobody older than 30. Strong, useful people. I asked what skills they had. Mostly farmers and herders, but Lin Xiaoxi mentioned someone called Zhuzi, who claimed to be a carpenter. I'd just spent nearly 200 silver taels hiring a blacksmith, so a carpenter showing up for free sounded perfect. When I called for Zhuzi, a tall guy stood up, still licking porridge from his wooden bowl, face black as a pot bottom. He looked not particularly bright. He asked for more food. Lin Xiaoxi kicked him and scolded him for embarrassing her at such a critical moment. I laughed and told him if he wanted to eat his fill, he had to prove himself useful. I handed him the wooden lock I'd built for the horse farm gate, a design I'd learned in my previous life from a Tibetan tribe. Nobody here had figured out how it worked, not even the constables. Zhuzi took the lock, pulled out a small axe from his belt, and got to work. He disassembled it carefully, studied the internal structure, and understood the mechanism almost immediately. He opened it with ease. That was all I needed to see. This kid had real talent, a natural-born craftsman. Lin Xiaoxi looked relieved. I could tell she was sharper than she let on. She'd already noticed the bandits hauling bodies on the ox cart outside the village and figured out I was someone dangerous. But she didn't flinch. She understood how the world worked now. In times like these, only the ruthless survive. She'd become the leader of all these men the same way, by killing a man who tried to assault her. After entering the village and seeing how the people here actually lived, peaceful, settled, fed, she'd made up her mind. She knew I was harsh, but I protected what was mine. A place like this was 1 in 10,000 during these chaotic times. I caught her watching me, waiting for my answer. All these people had followed her here, and if I turned them away, she'd carry that guilt forever. I didn't know it, but Lin Xiaoxi was ready to sacrifice anything for her people's sake. My attention was still on Juzi. I asked him again if he could really make a copy of my wooden lock. He said yes, plain and simple. I told him to go ahead and make one. He honestly told me it would take at least half a day. He wasn't going to lie about it. That answer made me like him even more. If he'd claimed he could do it right away, I'd have doubted him. Honesty mattered. The truth was, I didn't need an ordinary carpenter who could only make benches. I needed someone who could eventually build crossbows and weapons. That's why I'd spent big money hiring Zhang Tiezue the blacksmith. Juzi was exactly the kind of person I needed, simple-minded, easy to keep happy with a full belly, and genuinely skilled. I told him I'd build him a workshop starting tomorrow, and he'd be making bows and arrows. But I held back on sharing any blueprints. I still didn't fully trust Lin Xiaoxi. If she turned out to be trouble and my designs leaked, that would be a serious problem. I asked if there were any other skilled people among the group. Lin Xiaoxi said the men could handle any labor, and the women were good at sewing, cooking, and housework. That was useful. Qing'er and Qing'er had been handling all the cooking for everyone by themselves and never complained once. They deserved a break. I split the women into groups of 3 to cook at the horse farm and brick factory. As for my own meals, I'd only eat at home from now on. Can't be too careful. Lin Xiaoxi chased after me, asking what her job would be. I liked that she wasn't lazy. I told her I'd keep 12 people under her command to form a village guard. She'd train them with wooden spears. My real plan was smarter than it looked. By scattering her people across different work sites, I'd slowly weaken her influence over them. The guard team would also get mixed with villagers later, creating a balance of power. Between the horse farm guards, village guards, and Wang Dian's men, I'd have around 70 or 80 fighters total. More than enough. The next morning, I made all the assignments. Without cooking duties, the Moose sisters finally had easier days ahead. But I realized I needed someone to handle the growing accounts. Accountant G was too busy with the escort agency. So I turned to the sisters. They could read and write. And as the women of my household, managing finances made perfect sense. Husband, you want us to manage the accounts? Is this real? They could hardly believe it. Qing'er jumped right in, working the abacus like she'd been born for it, calculating every coin down to the last detail. I was completely at ease. By noon, it was time for my appointment at Tianweishan, the bandit stronghold. I brought my axe and hid that impossibly sharp dagger in a concealed spot on my body, just in case. Wang Dinglu was waiting on the road outside the village as promised. He seemed impressed I came alone. He said their boss genuinely wanted to meet me, but still, going to a bandit fortress solo took guts. I just smiled. My people were all busy, and bringing Lin Xiaoxi to something this important didn't feel right yet. Besides, it was just a mountain hideout, not some deadly trap. Wang Dinglu gave me a thumbs up and had someone bring out a horse, a chestnut mare named Zhaohong, his boss's personal favorite. He said the boss sent it specially because the stronghold was dozens of li away and didn't want me getting tired. That horse wasn't easy to come by, and the gesture told me something about how seriously they were taking this meeting. I looked at Wang Dinglu and his companion, apparently planning to follow me on foot. I almost laughed. How were 2 men on foot supposed to keep up with a horse? I asked Wang Dinglu how many horses the stronghold had. He laughed and said this was their only one. They just had a few mules for hauling. When I asked why the boss didn't ride his own beloved horse, Wang Dinglu gave me a bitter smile and said I'd understand when I got there. I figured it out on my own. The boss must be disabled somehow. When I reached the gates of Tianweishan, I couldn't believe my eyes. This was supposed to be a bandit hideout, but it was spotless. Every stone step had been scrubbed clean. The welcoming bandits wore neat, tidy clothes. The buildings were arranged in perfect rows with flowers and green plants everywhere. I felt like I'd accidentally walked into some rich family's estate, not a mountain fortress. At the main hall entrance, Wang Dinglu stopped me. Two kids came out with feather dusters and brushed the dirt off my clothes. Then someone brought out a tray with fresh cloth shoes for me to change into. I nearly dropped my jaw. Had I somehow traveled through time again? Inside the clean hall, a refined-looking young man sat behind a large desk. He had delicate features like a scholar. When he saw me, he stood up, straightened his clothes, and greeted me with a polite bow. He introduced himself as Wu Jiang, the head boss of Tianwei. Then came the second boss, Zhai Rang, a sturdy man around 45 with graying hair and a commanding presence. Third boss, Zhai Shanchuan, Wang Dinglu as infantry leader, and Zhang Shun as security captain. 5 people total for their whole leadership. I introduced myself with just a few words. Lu Feng, villager of Siwa village. Honestly, I was laughing inside. This tiny operation had 3 bosses and 2 commanders, acting like they were running some grand army. Zhai Rang stood up first to toast me, praising my courage for coming alone. He downed his bowl in one gulp, a straightforward man with real warrior spirit. The others followed. But I noticed Wu Jiang looked annoyed that Zhai Rang had jumped ahead of him as host. I filed that away and said nothing. After drinking with Wu Jiang, I cut straight to the point. Surely he didn't invite a small village chief up here just to eat and drink. My directness startled him so badly he choked and coughed into a white handkerchief. I noticed it had flowers embroidered on it. Between his pretty face and that handkerchief, I had some thoughts about this guy, but his voice was definitely male. Just effeminate. The food was impressive though, all kinds of wild game and decent wine. Not as strong as my own distilled liquor, but quality stuff for this era. Wu Jiang clapped his hands, and Wang Dinglu dragged in a prisoner. Zhai Shanchuan stood beside him. I put down my chopsticks. It was a barbarian. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Were they planning to defect to the enemy? Was this a captured scout? Were they trying to drag me into treason? Wu Jiang explained. His men had caught 2 barbarian scouts during patrol. One died under torture. This one they kept alive. Zhai Shanchuan had done business in the northern barbarian lands before and could communicate with them, so they'd gotten some intelligence. Winter was coming. The main army held the fortress at Tianyong City, so the barbarians couldn't break through head-on. Instead, they'd sent swarms of scouts and raiders deep into Yuzhou territory, planning small-scale attacks to disrupt our forces and, more importantly, cut off the army's food supply to starve them out. I listened quietly. Wu Jiang was a scholar-faced bandit, but still a bandit. I didn't buy that he was driven by patriotism. Then he dropped the real news. There was an elite barbarian squad hiding in the valley west of their mountain. Wu Jiang laid it out. Tianwei wasn't strong enough to take on the barbarian squad alone. But if I joined forces with them, we could handle the 100 or so elite fighters. I picked up a piece of lamb casually and asked if they'd confirmed the exact location. They had. Wang Dinglu had scouted the enemy camp himself and found massive stockpiles of grain, war horses, weapons, and armor. It looked like a supply base where more barbarian units would gather later. That sent a chill down my spine. All those supplies couldn't have been carried over the mountains by hand. The barbarians had planned this invasion well in advance. Enough weapons and armor to equip 1,000 soldiers. If that many raiders started attacking Yozhou's supply lines, the consequences would be devastating. But I wasn't about to get swept up in patriotic speeches. I saw right through their game. They were bandits who wanted those supplies and were using the nation's honor to get me to fight for them. I only cared about protecting Siwa village. So I wasn't doing this for free. I told Wu Jiang I only cared about one thing. What happens after we win? The room went tense. Wang Dinglu and the others looked displeased. Wu Jiang sent the barbarian prisoner away and asked me to name my terms. I held up 3 fingers and said 70-30 was fair. Wu Jiang's face lit up, thinking I meant 30 for myself, and even offered me 40. I corrected him. I meant 70 for me, 30 for them. The room went silent. They argued that their men had found the intelligence and risked their lives scouting. I cut them off. Without me, they couldn't pull this off at all. They could either take 30% of something or 100% of nothing. My words were calm, but left no room for debate. Wu Jiang agreed. He had no real choice. Winter was coming, and feeding 100 bandits through the cold season was already a crisis. They couldn't buy supplies openly because of their outlaw status, and robbing poor villagers wasn't something they did anymore. The barbarian stockpile was their lifeline. To soften the deal, I told them we'd divide by category. They could take more of the food and winter supplies since that's what they needed most. I wasn't heartless. What I actually wanted was the weapons and armor. My village had enough grain stored up thanks to the water bandits' hidden cellar that Tian Laoba had found. Weapons were what I was truly short on. With the deal settled, we drank some more. Wang Dinglu would take me to scout the barbarian camp personally. I wanted this done fast, so I hurried home to prepare. When I arrived, I found the Moose sisters running around the yard like happy butterflies, carrying my 2 tiger cubs. Those little beasts had grown a full size bigger since I brought them home, and the sisters had somehow turned fierce predators into obedient puppies. There was someone else in the yard today, Wu Xiangyue. The moment she heard me coming, her face turned bright red. She was clearly still thinking about what happened between us after I killed that bear. I wasn't planning to tell Wu Xiangyue about the barbarian raid. With her wild personality, she'd insist on coming along. I still remembered how she nearly got me killed during the bear hunt. Against 100 elite barbarian scouts, I couldn't risk her doing something reckless at the wrong moment. She pointed at a box of pastries on the table, saying they were from Tianyong City, brought for the 2 sisters. She told me to eat them if I wanted, acting like she didn't care. Then she stormed off, clearly upset that I was being cold. In her heart, she was begging me to call her back, but I didn't. She turned around one last time and warned me about the martial arts competition at the Great Snow Festival. Apparently, some noble young men from Tianyong City who'd trained since childhood would be competing too. She told me not to get overconfident just because I was strong. Then she stomped away, kicking little stones along the path. I had to fight hard not to laugh. Those pastries were obviously bought for me, not the sisters. She was just jealous and worried I'd lose the competition. The Moose sisters noticed everything. Wan Qing was wise, Wan Qing was sweet, and Xiangyue was bold and careless on the outside but fragile inside. 3 completely different women. Wan Qing guessed something was going on. I told them about Tian Weishan's discovery, a barbarian scout base with enough weapons and armor to equip 1,000 soldiers, set up to sabotage our army's supply lines. Tian Weishan wanted my help taking it out. Wan Qing asked if it was dangerous. I told them the truth. These weren't ordinary bandits like the water fort. These were trained elite soldiers, and there were many of them. The escort agency's men were mostly injured and not suited for military-level combat. Xiangyue had skill but was too impulsive for something this serious. Wan Qing's heart trembled when I mentioned age and maturity. She was even younger than Xiangyue, yet I trusted the sisters with the accounts. She realized how much faith I had in them. I told them not to worry. I had a plan. If there was one thing I was good at from my past life, it was studying history books during long missions. I'd read about all kinds of war chariots and battle formations. I grabbed paper and brush and started drawing. Before long, Wan Qing looked at my sketch and asked why I was drawing a turtle. I glared at her. It wasn't a turtle, it was a tank. Well, a wooden war chariot inspired by one I'd read about in Water Margin. In the novel, these chariots had been devastating in battle against the famous warrior Guansheng. My design used interlocking wooden beams that would deflect most weapons. Spikes jutting out from the sides would hurt anyone who got close, and blades could be mounted to cut through enemies as it moved forward. I knew wooden construction wouldn't last long. If Zhang Tiezue the blacksmith had been back with his tools, I could have armored it with iron plating. But I had to work with what I had. The original design from the novel used men inside to drive it, but I couldn't waste manpower like that. I added 4 round wheels to the bottom so it could be pushed from behind. The mobility would be poor, but against trained barbarian fighters, I planned to fight a defensive positional battle, not a chase. Each chariot would need at least 4 men, pushers who could also strike at enemies between charges. This was the best I could build with current resources against elite barbarian troops who outnumbered us. A head-on fight would be suicide. The best approach was a surprise attack combined with fire. The tank chariots weren't suited for night raids or fire attacks, but they could block escape routes. Once close combat started, the tanks would shine. Still, that was my backup plan. Everything depended on the terrain. I spent hours drawing detailed blueprints across 5 pages, covering the exterior, interior structure, and wheel mechanisms. I designed everything with mortise and tenon joints so the whole thing could be taken apart and carried through rough terrain. I trusted Juzi could build it. The kid had figured out my wooden lock in minutes. I called Juzi over and explained the design. He scratched his head, clearly confused by the strange contraption, but said he could do it. I told him 3 days, 3 tanks, no excuses. If he needed help, get more hands. He went straight to Lin Xiaoxi, which was exactly what I wanted. Her people would help build the tanks and then crew them in battle, so the more familiar they were with the machines, the better they'd perform. The next morning, Wang Dinglu arrived at the village with 2 men. We rode mules into the mountains, slower than horses, but far better than walking. After over 2 hours of winding through hills, we reached the area near the barbarian camp. Wang Dinglu left 1 man with the mules while the rest of us crept forward on foot. The barbarians had chosen well. Their camp was hidden in a wide valley surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and dense forest all around. Without someone who knew these mountains like Wang Dinglu, you'd never find it. I peeked over a black boulder and studied what lay below. Tents packed tightly along a stream, filling the whole valley. Barbarian soldiers moved between them, some cooking, some slaughtering sheep. The smell of roasting lamb drifted up on the wind, making Wang Dinglu and his man swallow hard. What worried me was the defenses. They'd built a perimeter fence and dug trenches filled with water. That wasn't normal. Barbarians were nomads. They didn't build fixed defenses like trenches. I pointed this out to Wang Dinglu. Then I noticed more oddities. Their sheep were black, a breed from Ningzhou, not the white sheep barbarians typically kept. Most of their supplies were clearly looted from our own territory. But the real puzzle was the camp layout. The valley had 1 entrance, yet the camp's gate faced the opposite direction. You had to follow a narrow path all the way around to get in. For a people whose greatest strength was cavalry, this design made no sense. Horsemen couldn't move freely through it at all. I asked Wang Dinglu to explain. He just scratched his head, clueless. Something about this camp didn't add up. These weren't ordinary barbarian scouts setting up a temporary base. Someone with real military knowledge had designed this. Wang Dinglu had scouted this camp several times, but never noticed anything strange. Now that I pointed it out, he saw it too. I explained what I'd figured out. The water-filled trenches would weaken any fire attack. The wooden fences blocked rolling logs and boulders. The tents looked randomly placed, but were actually positioned under thick tree canopy, making arrow strikes nearly useless. And the reversed entrance gave them plenty of reaction time if attacked. Whoever designed this camp was no fool. Wang Dinglu asked what we should do. I shook my head. A straight fight against elite barbarian warriors with our numbers would be suicide. I asked how much fire oil the stronghold had. He said they had some, but worried that burning the camp would destroy all the supplies we wanted. I told him to look more carefully. The visible supplies could only feed that many men for about half a month. So where was the rest of their winter food? It had to be either underground or at a second hidden location. I told Wang Dinglu to spend the next few days secretly watching the camp. If the barbarians went out to get supplies, he should track where they went. If they didn't leave, then the food was buried underground, which actually worked in our favor. We could burn everything above ground, and the real stockpile would survive. I also whispered some special instructions in his ear. Whatever I said made his jaw drop. Then he gave me a thumbs up. He thought it was ruthless. It was. After splitting up with Wang Dinglu, I rode straight to Wenhuang County and bought a set of carpentry tools. Seeing the terrain had changed my plans. The tank chariots would be useless in that mountain valley. What I needed was a trebuchet. I didn't want Juzi or Lin Xiaoxi's people involved in building it. I still didn't trust them enough to share this kind of technology. I'd build it myself. The principle was simple enough. I couldn't make a tension-based one without proper elastic materials, so I went with a counterweight design. A small one would do. Positioned on the ridge above the valley, it could lob fire oil across the full 200-meter range of the camp below. I drew up the blueprints at home. The Mu sisters watched me work for a long time without understanding what I was making, but they didn't ask questions, just quietly brewed tea and handed me tools. Wanqing asked why I kept making strange things. I patted her cheek and told her this was nothing, just a wooden frame. I said my head was full of inventions. Soap for washing, glass, lamps brighter than candles that needed no flame, carriages that moved without horses, and powerful explosives. Her eyes went wide with wonder. She asked if I was planning to join the army. That caught me off guard. I had no such intention. Everything I built was for self-defense, not war. I wouldn't hand my inventions over to anyone. If they ever reached a battlefield, it would only be because I had no other choice. But I told her this: if anyone ever threatened my family, I'd fight the entire empire if I had to. She nodded firmly. 2 days later, the trebuchet was finished, small enough for 2 people to carry when disassembled. I tested it in a secluded spot with Tian Laoba and Wang San. We spent 3 full days working out problems. The counterweight was too light for the range I needed. I adjusted the lever's curve, had Yang Guizi carve a custom stone weight, and raised the throwing arm's height. Finally, it reached the distance I wanted. Right on time, Zhang Tiezue the blacksmith arrived back with the supply convoy. The second batch of bricks was coming out of the kiln too. He picked a spot and started building his smithy. Things were coming together. Wu Santong finished unloading supplies and told me the horse farm only had 5 days' worth of feed left. The next run would go south, a first for them, also about 5 days. If anything went wrong, it'd take longer. I told him not to worry. Once the water fort was converted into a supply hub, I'd set up a fishing operation there. The spot where 7 waterways met was rich with fish, and since it was unclaimed territory, it could become a proper food reserve. Eventually, I'd turn it into a fortress and granary. Even the barbarians couldn't touch it since they couldn't swim. Then Wu Santong pulled out a small jar of white powder. Saltpeter. My heart raced. This was the key ingredient for gunpowder. With enough of it, I could build cannons someday. He'd found it at a pharmacy in Tianyong City, but the quantity was tiny and the stuff was expensive. I told Xing'er to give him 300 taels of silver and made it clear, buy every bit of saltpeter he could find, no matter the cost. Feed could wait. This couldn't. After he left, I took out the charcoal and sulfur I'd already prepared at home. I ground everything up, mixed the 3 ingredients, packed the powder into a paper tube with a fuse, sealed it with mud, dried it, and carried it to the empty hillside behind the house. I lit the fuse and threw it. The waiting felt like centuries. Then bang! A sharp crack echoed through the air. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. In my past life, I'd built sophisticated timed explosives and high-powered bombs. Now here I was, nervously wondering if a homemade firecracker would go off. The irony made me laugh. This world's limitations held back so many of my skills. The real problem was supply. Saltpeter was rare and expensive. Large-scale gunpowder production was out of the question for now. Salt fields sometimes had saltpeter deposits nearby, but those were all government-controlled. I could extract small amounts from nitrate-rich soil or horse manure, but nowhere near enough for cannons. A few matchlock muskets, though, that was doable. Once Zhang Tiezue got his forge built, I'd melt down the weapons taken from the water fort and have enough iron for at least 1 gun. That evening, Wang Dinglu came galloping in on a mule, grinning from ear to ear. He said they'd found the barbarians' hidden grain depot, just like I predicted. It was incredibly well concealed. They'd passed it multiple times without noticing. The guards were few, so they'd already taken it over. I spat out my tea. Taken it over? Who told them to do that? This was the opposite of what I wanted. Seizing the depot would alert the barbarians immediately. We'd just lost our element of surprise. Wang Dinglu looked confused, saying I was the one who said cutting their food supply would throw them into chaos. I nearly slapped him. If this had been my old unit, someone pulling a stunt like this would have gotten a broken leg at minimum. I forced myself to calm down and barked orders. Get back to the stronghold immediately. Gather all fighters and bring everything I'd requested. Have the men at the grain depot disguise themselves as barbarian scouts and act natural. Everyone converge at the mountain slope above the barbarian camp. We were out of time. The attack had to happen now. Wang Dinglu realized he'd messed up and took off immediately. I cursed under my breath. I'd been planning a relaxed evening at home, and now everything was thrown into chaos. There was no time to waste. I threw on a warm coat, gave the sisters quick instructions about the house, and started mobilizing everyone. Wang Dian and 2 of my trusted men carried the disassembled trebuchet, each taking a section. Lin Xiaoxi's patrol team hauled the tank chariots. Tian Laoba loaded weapons onto a dozen horses. We marched out heavy and fast. At the mountain's base, horses would draw too much attention, so we unloaded everything onto people's backs and left Tian Laoba below with the animals. Tian Weishan's forces arrived half an hour early at the meeting point. I distributed tank parts among their men too, and we pushed into the mountains together. The whole way up, I kept scolding Wang Dinglu. He knew he'd screwed up and didn't say a word. Zhai Shanchuan, the third boss, was in good spirits, though. The big man carried the tall trebuchet frame on his shoulders like it was nothing, cracking jokes to lighten the mood. Zhai Rang, the second boss, came forward with a polite excuse. He said Wu Jiang had put everyone under my command, but his own men were old veterans, too aged for frontline combat, better suited for support roles. I saw through the politics, but didn't have time to argue. I assigned them to guard the trebuchet, which actually made sense. Experienced fighters protecting my most important weapon. After 2 hours of hiking, we reached the position. It was the dead of night. The enemy's alertness would be at its lowest. My people were exhausted from hours of preparation and marching, so I gave them time to rest while my inner circle assembled the tanks and trebuchet. Then I gave out assignments. Zhang Shun would take the fire oil around to the right flank and support the tank chariots once they moved on the camp. Wang Dinglu would back up Zhang Shun and kill anyone who slipped through. Lin Xiaoxi would finish assembling the tanks within half an hour and use them to seal the valley entrance completely. Not a single barbarian gets out alive. Wang Dian, Zhang Hongda, and Li Fei, my best archers, would stay near the trebuchet, raining fire arrows and picking off anyone who broke through toward our position. Zhai Shanchuan would patrol the perimeter against flanking attacks. Zhai Rang asked about his job. I pointed to the pile behind the trebuchet, jars of fire oil and jars of manure. Those were my ammunition. His face fell, but that was his assignment: protect the supplies. I personally aimed the first shot. With dense trees around, accuracy was everything. I calibrated the angle, adjusted the trajectory, and gave the order. Fire. The trebuchet arm swung with a groan. A jar of fire oil sailed into the darkness and vanished. Seconds later, the sound of shattering pottery echoed from the barbarian camp below. A few night patrol guards heard the noise and went to investigate. The second jar was already loaded. I aimed for a wooden supply shed in the camp. After all my adjustments, the trebuchet's accuracy at this range was within half a meter. The jar smashed right on target. The patrol guards finally realized what was happening. They grabbed a torch, saw the dark liquid, smelled it, and panicked. They started screaming alerts across the camp. That panic was exactly what I needed. Over 20 fire arrows streaked through gaps in the treetops and rained down on the camp. The fire oil I'd already landed became the kindling. Flames erupted in multiple spots. My third shot targeted the central water source, splashing fire oil all around it, so they couldn't fetch water to fight the fires. Barbarians stumbled out of their tents half asleep, terrified by the walls of flame surrounding them. Lin Xiaoxi counted the explosions, and after the fifth jar, she led the charge. 3 tank chariots rolled forward in formation, pushing into the valley opening and sealing it shut. The barbarians were trapped. Their commander reacted fast, trying to rally his men into defensive positions. Bad timing. As the soldiers grouped together, the trebuchet launched its next payload right into the crowd. It hit 2 soldiers and splattered everywhere. Wet, dripping, foul-smelling. One touch and they knew it was manure. The formation dissolved instantly. Soldiers scattered in every direction, gagging, fighting over water buckets to wash themselves off. Total chaos. Zhai Rang complained that guarding manure jars was beneath his skilled fighters. I reminded him he'd asked for a safe position. He went quiet. I laughed and told him his chance for real action was coming. I kept raining filth on the camp until there wasn't a clean spot left. The commander finally gave up on firefighting and ordered a frontal breakout. But the camp was tiny and overcrowded. Hundreds of men pushing forward in pitch darkness only made the confusion worse. I redirected the archers toward anyone trying to escape. Wang Dian and my men had become expert marksmen under my training. Every barbarian head that popped up met an arrow. Round after round of attacks crushed their morale. With the exit blocked by tank chariots and fire consuming their camp, desperation set in. Many had fled their tents without weapons or armor. Those who reached the valley mouth discovered what real despair looked like. 3 massive war chariots blocked every inch of the exit. They'd never seen anything like them, no obvious weak points. A few brave ones tried climbing over and were instantly cut down by the fighters hidden inside. Groups of 5 or 6 tried together, managed to pry off some outer blades and pin down one inner sword, but each chariot held 3 men. The moment one was occupied, his partner struck. Bodies piled up at the barricade. Without enough horses for a cavalry charge, the barbarians had no way to smash through. Their commander finally pushed to the front and realized the attacks were mostly noise. Our actual numbers were small. He ordered his men to abandon the valley floor and climb the mountainsides instead. It worked. Barbarian soldiers scrambled up exposed tree roots and rocky slopes. Within minutes, 30 or 40 had made it up. I turned to Zhai Rang. Now, this is your moment. His eyes lit up. He'd been itching for blood this whole time. He was a strong fighter himself, and his veterans were experienced killers. He drew his massive cleaver, pointed it forward, and bellowed to his men. Brothers, follow me. Kill. The barbarians kept climbing, but it was dark and their morale was shattered. Those who made it up became easy prey. Zhai Rang was a monster in combat. Huge, powerful, cutting down enemies like vegetables with his massive cleaver. Few lasted more than 3 exchanges against him. He even mocked them, asking if this was really the best the barbarian elite had to offer. But pressure was building on all sides as more enemies poured out of the burning camp. I abandoned the trebuchet, grabbed my crossbow, and loaded a special bolt. My target was their commander on horseback. He'd been careful to stay beyond trebuchet and arrow range. He didn't know my crossbow had more than double the range and speed of a normal bow. By the time he sensed the danger, it was too late. The bolt punched clean through his skull, and the impact sent his body flying off the horse. One shot, instant death. Zhai Shanchuan appeared immediately, begging to see my crossbow. I ignored him and walked away. I caught the flash of anger in his eyes, almost murderous. I noted it, but didn't care. If I didn't still need him, he'd already be dead. He later tried sneaking closer to examine the trebuchet. Before his hand touched it, my blade was already swinging. He yanked his hand back, sweating, and made some excuse about admiring the wood. I told him flatly, "Touch my things and lose your hand." He backed off. When Wang Jian returned, I had the trebuchet disassembled immediately. Zhai Shanchuan stared at the pile of wooden pieces, completely unable to figure out how they fit together. Half an hour after the commander fell, dawn began breaking. I ordered the final push. Tank chariots led the charge with everyone else sweeping behind them. The barbarians had been burned, pelted with filth, shot with arrows, and demoralized all night. By full daylight, the camp was completely cleared. Wang Dinglu greeted me with a grin, excited about the haul. I asked about the separate grain depot his men had seized earlier. He confirmed the supplies were intact and guarded by 2 of his brothers, with the original barbarian guards disposed of deep in the mountains. He said the stockpile there was several times larger than what was in the camp. I told him to finish here first. The camp reeked from fire and manure, barely walkable. But the flames hadn't been as devastating as they looked. Aside from some grain and livestock lost, the weapons and armor were untouched. Just from the camp alone, the piles of weapons and armor formed a small mountain. And this was only a fraction. The storage caves held dozens more crates. I picked up a barbarian war sword and froze. These weren't curved barbarian blades at all. They were straight long swords, identical to standard-issue military weapons of the Great Li Dynasty. Every single one was brand new, gleaming cold. Wang Dinglu was confused too. The barbarians had fought last night with their own curved sabers and horse-chopping blades. So what were these for? I had him open an armor crate. My jaw dropped. Row after row of pristine armor, and not a single piece was barbarian-made. Every suit belonged to the Great Li Dynasty's army. Everyone was shocked by the Great Li Dynasty weapons and armor. Zhai Shanchuan suggested the barbarians might have raided our military supply convoys. Then Lin Xiaoxi dragged out a prisoner she'd found hiding in a tent, a man wearing his hair in a Chinese topknot, dressed in Great Li clothes. Clearly one of our own people. My expression turned cold. We might have stumbled onto something far bigger than a barbarian scouting base. If this led back to someone powerful secretly dealing with the enemy, things would get very dangerous. I ordered the prisoner taken away before Zhai Shanchuan could say anything. Lin Xiaoxi had worked hard to capture this man alive, pushing through the stench of the ruined camp to prove herself. She also handed me an account book she'd found, written entirely in Great Li script. She couldn't read, so she'd left it unopened. My suspicions were confirmed. The barbarians had help from inside the empire. Building a base this large on our territory required long planning. These scouts had probably entered Yuzhou disguised as merchants and civilians well before the war began. And all these supplies couldn't have been stolen. If military convoys were being robbed, the court would have responded. Someone on the inside was handing these goods over willingly. I opened the account book and felt a chill. Everyone around me was illiterate, but their eyes were all fixed on it. I pocketed it quickly and sent Lin Xiaoxi to interrogate the prisoner about supply channels and their mission here. Screams soon echoed from the distance. I had Wang Dinglu take me to the grain depot. After a short walk, we reached a hidden cave. Inside, the sight was staggering. Rows of grain sacks stacked neatly, and deeper in, a massive cavern holding herds of sheep, horses, and crate after crate of armor and weapons. I sliced open a grain sack with my dagger. Pure white rice poured out. Wang Dinglu tasted it, and his face twisted with anger. This was premium new rice, the kind ordinary people never saw. I told him what I suspected. This was disaster relief rice from the Imperial Treasury, and the armor was military issue. Someone high up, no mere county official, had diverted these straight from the National Reserves. The account book confirmed the timeline. The rice had arrived here just 2 months ago, exactly when the Fengling army was deploying to Tianyong City. Everything pointed to a coordinated plan: supply the barbarian raiders to cut off our army's food lines and starve them into defeat. If the Fengling army fell, Tianyong City would follow, and all of Yuzhou would be wide open. Wang Dinglu wanted to ride to Tianyong City and report everything to the Fengling army. I shut that down immediately. Who would believe a bandit? Even with the account book as proof, documents could be forged. And whoever was behind this had enough power to plant agents inside the military. Wang Dinglu would be assassinated before he ever reached the general's tent. I told him to quietly inform everyone present that the account book's existence was to remain absolutely secret. Anyone who talked would be killed. And do it one person at a time, privately, no shouting announcements like last time. The truth was clear to me. With people this powerful pulling strings behind the scenes, there was no safe way to deliver this information to the Fengling army's famous female commander. Not yet. I understood the bigger picture clearly. This was political infighting at the highest levels. Someone wanted the Fengling army destroyed, and they were willing to sacrifice millions of Yuzhou civilians to do it. I couldn't stomach that, but I also couldn't rush into it blindly. The Fengling army was massive. These supplies alone wouldn't cripple them immediately. I'd be heading to Tianyong City soon enough and could figure out how to make contact then. With that settled, I turned to dividing the spoils. Following our 70-30 agreement, I gave Tianweishan extra food and livestock since that's what they needed most. Both sides tended to their wounded. Thankfully, nobody died in the battle, and all injuries were minor. Then we went our separate ways. The sheer volume of what we'd captured was staggering. Using military horses, ox carts, and every person Lin Xiaoxi had, it still took 3 full days of hauling to get everything back to Siwa village. The Mu sisters had the hardest job of all, cataloging every single item as it arrived before anything could enter storage. Wanqing presented me with the final inventory: 43 military horses, 340 sheep, 48 pigs, 14 cattle, 480 stone of premium white rice, 700 stone of mixed grain, 45 stone worth of dried meat, 1,070 sets of weapons and armor. Wanqing's records were meticulous. She'd even noted the condition of every weapon and the health of each animal. I was deeply impressed. The problem was that every weapon and suit of armor bore great Li Dynasty markings. I couldn't just hand these out to my people without raising dangerous questions. Everything would need to be melted down and reforged. Zhang Tietsue's smithy was nearly finished, so reforging could start soon and be done before the new year. I still couldn't predict what winter or spring would bring. I sat thinking about it until I noticed Wanqing standing there, waiting. I realized she wanted praise. I told her she'd done an excellent job. She really had become an indispensable partner in managing everything. With the accounts handled and the massive haul secured, I felt my position growing stronger by the day. I decided I needed to take better care of my health going forward. With everything on my plate, I couldn't afford to let my body wear down. There was too much work ahead. A few days later, winter officially arrived. Wu Santong returned from the south on a frosty morning with a huge supply of horse feed. And something even better. He set a burlap sack in front of me. I opened it, and my face lit up. 3 whole sacks of saltpeter, all high quality, bought from southern salt fields at just 10 taels per bag. With this much, I had enough to make serious quantities of gunpowder through the entire winter. Wu Santong paced around my yard with his hands on his hips, clearly waiting for praise. I caught on and gave him the compliments he deserved. He tried to pry out what I needed so much saltpeter for. I told him it was for fighting the barbarians. He suggested poison would be more efficient. I just smiled and said every medicine is part poison. He assumed it was some medical thing and pretended to understand. Before he could keep asking, Lin Xiaoxi came running in, breathless. Wang Dinglu was here, and it was urgent. He stumbled into my yard supported by Lin Xiaoxi, covered in blood, limping badly with 3 arrows in his back. Tian Weishan had fallen apart. The second boss Zhai Rang had turned traitor, joining forces with a rival bandit group called Gao Lu Peak in a coordinated attack. Zhang Shun had betrayed them too. They were trying to kill Wu Jiang. Wang Dinglu said Zhai Shanchuan had gotten Wu Jiang into a hidden room in the back of the compound. But Zhai Rang knew where it was, and they had limited supplies inside. It was only a matter of time before they broke through. He begged me to save his boss, then collapsed unconscious, blood pouring from his mouth. Lin Xiaoxi asked if we should help. I snapped back. Help with what? Our patrol team against a combined bandit force? Wu Santong patted my shoulder and said it was too complicated, suggesting we just save Wang Dinglu and move on. He even offered to take Wang Dinglu into the escort agency. I told him to stop trying to steal people from me. I liked Wang Dinglu too. A man willing to die for his boss like that was rare and valuable. I turned to Lin Xiaoxi. Can you ride a horse? She blinked. Yes, get 2 horses ready. You and I are going. I grabbed a fine barbarian horse-chopping saber from our captured weapons and tossed it to her. She stared at me, stunned. Wu Santong jumped in front of me. Are you insane? You're going to save bandits? What's in it for you? Do you want to die? I told him straight. Whatever made Wang Dinglu willing to die for Wu Jiang meant Wu Jiang was worth saving. And Wang Dinglu had promised that if I helped today, all of Tian Weishan would follow me. That alone was worth the gamble. Lin Xiaoxi and I would ride fast, strike hard, and get out. If it was doable, we'd save them. If not, I wasn't stupid enough to throw my life away. Wu Santong grabbed a saber and told his men to assemble. He was coming with me. I told him to go rest after his long journey, but he got angry, said he'd been fighting his whole life and wasn't about to let me go alone. If nothing else, he couldn't face his daughter Xiang Yue if I got killed. So we rode out. Me, Lin Xiaoxi, Wu Santong, and 4 skilled escorts. Not many, but all capable fighters. On the way, I watched Lin Xiaoxi carefully. This rescue was partly a test of her loyalty. Honestly, saving Wu Jiang wasn't strictly necessary. That strange, effeminate scholar wasn't smarter than me. The person I really wanted was Zhai Shanchuan. That giant was incredibly strong and would make a perfect bodyguard. Even in the worst case, I'd already gained Wang Dinglu, a man of fierce loyalty. No matter how I calculated it, this trip was profitable. I caught myself thinking this way and felt a little disgusted at how calculating I'd become. We reached the mountain base quickly, tied the horses, and climbed on foot. Tian Weishan was a bloodbath. Bodies everywhere. I counted at least 40 corpses along the once spotless paths. The stronghold's population was small to begin with. Very few could still be alive. I estimated the rebel force at maybe 30 men total. Near the main hall, I spotted movement and waved everyone into a small side building. Inside it was a mess, but empty, until I noticed gaps in the bed's wooden boards. I pulled them up and found a hidden cellar. A woman screamed from below. Lin Xiaoxi jumped down without hesitation, and after a quick scuffle, dragged out a young woman in her 20s. I asked her name. She said Ruhua. I nearly choked. Ruhua. I couldn't believe she was here. My mind raced trying to make sense of it. I told her who I was, and she recognized the name immediately. Wu Jiang had mentioned me, and Wang Dinglu called me a hero. She told me Wu Jiang and the others were hiding in a secret room with its entrance under a flower pot in the main hall and its exit among some rocks behind the building. Both ends were guarded by enemies. I told her to stay hidden, and we'd come back after the rescue. Wu Santong asked if she was some long-lost relative of mine. I told him the story was too complicated for now. We crept toward the main hall, staying low beneath windows. I taught everyone basic military hand signals during the ride, the same ones from my mercenary days. No talking needed. I caught a patrolling guard from behind, covered his mouth, and Lin Xiaoxi slit his throat without hesitation. Clean work. I split the team, Lin Xiaoxi and 2 men around the right side, Wu Santong and 2 men to the left, and I'd go through the front door alone to draw their attention for a 3-sided ambush. I slipped through the main door and found myself face to face with Zhang Shan. He stared at me for several seconds, completely frozen with shock. In those seconds, I scanned the entire hall. 5 archers spread around Zhang Shan, for more men trying to pry open the secret entrance by the flower pot. 10 enemies total, including Zhang Shan. They outnumbered us slightly, but in fighting ability, we completely outclassed them. The attack began. Zhang Shan feared me. He knew what I'd done to the water fort with just a handful of villagers. But fear didn't save him. After a moment of shock, he reached for his sword. Too slow. My dagger flew first, splitting his hand clean in half. He screamed and stumbled backward. 2 archers tried to help him, but I was already moving. My dagger cut a bloodline across Zhang Shan's chest before either could react. The men prying at the secret entrance heard the noise and charged at me with swords. Right on cue, Wu Santong and Lin Xiaoxi crashed through the windows from both sides and cut them off. I dealt with my side in seconds. 2 archers dropped with single killing strikes each. 1 man swung at me. I caught his wrist, locked his arm, and drove my blade into his chest repeatedly. Another got kicked to the ground, and I slashed his throat several times. These were old mercenary techniques. 1 cut might not kill, but rapid successive wounds guaranteed fatal blood loss. The last archer saw his friends die, and his legs gave out. Zhang Shan, sliding down a pillar in a pool of his own blood, weakly raised his remaining hand to call for help. The archer screamed and ran. I turned calmly, brushed hair from my face, and threw my dagger. It buried itself in the back of his neck. He stumbled forward a few steps and dropped dead. 6 kills in moments. I walked over to Zhang Shan, still barely alive against the pillar. I told him his mistake was fighting instead of running. Though honestly, I would have hunted him down either way. I hated traitors. He twitched once and died. I wiped my blade on his body and looked up. The others had finished their fights too, though they'd taken considerably longer to handle fewer enemies. Lin Xiaoxi and Wu Santong both looked slightly embarrassed. No time to waste. I asked about the secret entrance mechanism. Nobody knew. I examined the floor. The hollow sound confirmed a passage below. I scanned the room and spotted a small decorative flower pot with a fake plant, dusty from neglect. I turned it. Gears rumbled underground, and a dark tunnel entrance opened in the floor. Lin Xiaoxi grabbed torches and led the way in. I was watching her closely throughout all of this. Her performance had been impressive. Brave, decisive, skilled. Not bad at all. We reached a stone chamber. Lin Xiaoxi threw a pebble ahead to check for traps. Nothing. She extended the torch around the corner, and a blade instantly sliced it in half. She shouted that we were from Siwa village, here to rescue them. Zhai Shanchuan stepped out cautiously, then broke into relief when he recognized us. He opened the inner chamber. Wu Jiang lay on a stone bed inside, face white as paper, a deep sword wound in his shoulder that had been bandaged. 2 of Zhai Shanchuan's loyal men stood guard beside him. Wu Jiang looked up at me with a bitter smile. "Brother Liu, how embarrassing for you to see me like this." Wu Jiang's wound looked bloody but wasn't life-threatening. I told him the plan. His people would exit through the main hall entrance while I went out the back exit to deal with Zhai Rang's forces at the rock pile. Wu Jiang protested. He said Zhai Rang had joined Gao Lu Peak and now commanded at least 20 skilled fighters. He wanted to retreat and fight another day. I refused. If we ran now, Zhai Rang would quickly figure out I was involved, and he might come after Siwa village. Besides, this man had been a problem since the barbarian raid. He was too ambitious to leave alive. Zhai Shanchuan came with me as Wu Jiang ordered. We reached the exit, triggered the mechanism, and the stone door ground open. Outside, Zhai Rang was gloating, expecting only Wu Jiang's exhausted handful to stumble out. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face. Fear, panic, every bad emotion hit him at once. After a few frozen seconds, he turned and ran. Smarter than Zhang Shan at least, but it wouldn't save him. I unslung my crossbow. Lin Xiaoxi, cover me. She drew her sword and shielded my flank. Zhai Shanchuan roared and charged into the enemy with 2 blades, and Wu Santong led the others into the melee. Steel clashed everywhere, blood flying. I tracked Zhai Rang through my crossbow sight. The old fox knew my weapon's power and kept zigzagging unpredictably. With a sniper rifle, this would have been over in a heartbeat, but a crossbow bolt accelerates slowly. I needed to predict his next move. I noticed a white horse tied up ahead. That was his escape plan. So I waited. Let him think he'd outsmarted me. His grin widened with every second I didn't fire. He was almost at the horse. Meanwhile, Lin Xiaoxi was struggling. 3 strong fighters had her pinned down, pushing her back toward me. She was barely holding them off. I told her to wait just a little longer. She gritted her teeth and fought like a woman with nothing to lose, pushing them back temporarily. Zhai Rang reached the horse and bent down to mount. Exactly as I'd predicted. I'd already aimed low, knowing he'd lean forward. I squeezed the trigger. The bolt punched through his shoulder. The impact threw him forward off his feet. Old fool, did you think I was stupid? I laughed and switched to my dagger. A gap opened in front of Lin Xiaoxi, and 2 enemies rushed in from both sides. She couldn't dodge without exposing me behind her, so she took the hit. A sword cut deep into her chest. She screamed, but kept fighting, trying to kick her attacker. Before her foot landed, my dagger had already buried itself in the bandit's body. I told her she'd done well, then dove into the crowd. The sound of my blade cutting through flesh filled the air, mixed with screams. I carved a path through and sprinted toward where Zhai Rang had fallen. Lin Xiaoxi, bleeding badly, ignored her wound and charged back into the fight to help Wu Santong's group. I reached Zhai Rang's position, but the crafty old man had crawled away. Following his blood trail, I suddenly felt danger behind me, a blade swinging from behind a boulder. I smiled, sidestepped, and kicked his wrist. His sword flew away. A second kick connected with his jaw and sent him crashing into a wall. The old man dropped to one knee, struggling to stand, his body broken. Before Zhai Rang could stand, I had my blade at his throat. I told him straight. His rebellion actually made things easier for me. If he hadn't turned traitor, I would have had to find another excuse to kill him. He laughed bitterly and accepted his fate. I lost. Kill me if you want. I raised the sword. Then he begged. He offered a secret in exchange for his life. He said Wu Jiang was far more dangerous than I realized. Saving him would bring devastating consequences down on me. When I pressed for details, he refused to say more unless I guaranteed his freedom. He told me Wu Jiang wasn't an ordinary person, that no real bandit builds elaborate hidden chambers, and that Wu Jiang's behavior had never been that of a common outlaw. He mentioned a hidden box containing all of Wu Jiang's secrets. I let him talk until he'd said everything useful. Then he pulled the arrow from his shoulder and started limping toward the horse, thinking I'd agreed to let him go. I drove my sword into his back. The blade cut to the bone, shattering his spine. He collapsed, blood gurgling from his mouth, staring at me with shock and hatred. You broke your word. You'll die for this. I walked over and pushed the blade through his chest. I never made you any promises. Letting you speak your secrets was already the most mercy you'd get from me. I twisted the sword and finished him. The battle was still raging. Lin Xiaoxi was nearly spent. I jumped in and immediately killed a Gao Lu Peak bandit, threatening her. With me in the fight, it ended fast. Every strike I made took a life. No fancy moves, just efficient killing. When it was over, everyone except me and Wu Santong was wounded. Zhai Shanchuan had 8 cuts, but nothing deep. The big man had just charged forward like a bull the entire time. Lin Xiaoxi's chest wound from protecting me was painful, but not fatal. She performed perfectly and earned my trust. The escorts had minor injuries. I brought Wu Jiang back and settled him in the house that used to belong to Wang Changsheng to recover. Wang Dinglu needed 2 days of treatment at the neighboring village doctor. I kept thinking about Zhai Rang's warning. Wang Dinglu surely knew Wu Jiang's secret too. Rather than pressing Wu Jiang directly, I decided to work on Wang Dinglu first. The next morning, I brought him porridge. He was grateful and emotional when he heard Wu Jiang had been saved and Zhai Rang killed. I reminded him of his promise, that he'd serve me with absolute loyalty. He hesitated briefly, then nodded firmly. Trading my loyalty for my boss's life is a fair deal. From now on, I'm your man. Through fire and death, no hesitation. Then I asked him to tell me Wu Jiang's secret. He went pale. He said the secret was so enormous that once I knew, I'd have to choose between keeping Wu Jiang alive or killing him. He begged me not to kill his boss. I told him the decision would depend on what the secret was. He took a breath and began. Do you remember what dynasty ruled Yuzhou before the Great Li? 100 years ago, This land belonged to another empire, the Great Wei. Then the Li dynasty produced a legendary emperor called Wu Jing, who crushed all rebellion and conquered everything in his path. To this day, most people in Yuzhou are descendants of the old Wei kingdom. A chill ran through me as I listened. I'd already guessed it before Wang Dinglu finished. Don't tell me Wu Jiang is a descendant of the Great Wei dynasty. Royal bloodline. Wang Dingliu's eyes went wide. Not just royal, direct lineage. If the Wei kingdom still existed, he'd be the crown prince. I laughed bitterly. I'd seen this kind of storyline plenty of times. He explained the history. When the Great Li Empire conquered Wei 100 years ago, the Wei emperor had been beloved by his people. So the Li rulers adopted a strategy of using Wei people to govern Wei territory, then quietly eliminating them one by one over the decades. Now, a century later, hardly anyone remembered the old kingdom. Those who dreamed of restoring it couldn't get anywhere near the imperial court. But in the shadows, two major underground groups had formed, the Restoration Sect and the Heaven and Earth Society. Both were hunting for Wei royal descendants to use as figureheads for rebellion. Wu Jiang knew that joining them would make him a puppet while the country burned again in civil war. So he'd hidden himself among bandits. Tian Weishan had existed for generations as a haven for Wei descendants, and the previous leader had entrusted Wang Dinglu with protecting Wu Jiang's identity before dying. That explained Wang Dingliu's fierce loyalty. It wasn't just personal devotion, it was a sense of duty to his people. I thought it was foolish, honestly. Dynasties rise and fall. That's the natural order. Royal blood is no different from anyone else's. Rulers who claim divine mandate are just finding excuses for their power. Wang Dingliu's devotion was blind loyalty to a dead cause. He also told me Wu Jiang wasn't the only surviving Wei royal. There were 3 total. Wu Jiang had the purest bloodline, but 2 sisters had been taken in by the Heaven and Earth Society as children, and their whereabouts were unknown. If the rebels couldn't find Wu Jiang, those sisters would become their tools instead. After confirming I wouldn't harm Wu Jiang, Wang Dinglu shared everything else he knew. I left with a lot to think about. Back home, I sat in the yard staring at nothing until noon. Wan Xing noticed and asked what was wrong. I brushed it off and told her to go cook. She and her sister offered to each make a dish, wild boar stew versus deer meat. Then a voice rang out from the gate. Make extra, I'm eating too. Wu Xiangyue. Of course. Her father had told her everything. The barbarian raid, the Tian Weishan rescue. She'd been stewing in anger for days, thinking I was ignoring her. But once she learned the truth, her anger vanished and turned to worry. She stormed in and fired off questions. Why didn't I tell her about the barbarian camp? She knew I thought she'd slow me down. Her voice cracked like she was about to cry. I just smiled and watched her without answering. She needed her temper worn down, and reacting would only make it worse. Wan Xing stepped in smoothly, pulling Xiangyue aside to help wash vegetables. She gently explained that I carried heavy responsibilities and couldn't afford mistakes, and that the best thing we women could do was support and trust. Wan Xing was wise beyond her years, and her sister backed her up. Xiangyue's fire dimmed. She mumbled that she'd behave and listen from now on. But she couldn't help adding, half angry, half tearful, that I needed to stop being so reckless. If something happened to me, who would she marry? She attacked a cabbage leaf like it was my face. I told her to trust me. I only ever took calculated risks. That was the truth. The Mu sisters worried about me every time I went out, but they'd learned to trust my judgment and focused on keeping things running at home. Xiangyue was still fuming about being left out. She complained to Wan Xing about always taking my side when they'd supposedly agreed to team up against me. Wan Xing just made a funny face and smiled. I called Xiangyue inside. She looked nervous immediately, sensing something was coming. I asked her to honestly assess her fighting ability. She said she could handle 3 to 5 opponents easily, 7 or 8 with effort. Good, but did she understand the gap between her and me? I let my killing intent surface, the real thing, not playfulness. My entire presence changed in an instant. The warmth left my eyes, and what remained was the cold focus of a man who'd spent years ending lives professionally. Xiangyue stumbled backward. She looked at me like I was a stranger, a demon walking out of hell. She couldn't even muster the thought of resisting. She called out, "Husband," in a trembling voice, reminding me who she was. I told her that being my future wife didn't mean I'd tolerate her recklessness. Then I grabbed her waist and tickled her mercilessly. She burst out laughing, slapping my shoulders, begging me to stop. She was furious. I'd terrified her on purpose just to get my hands on her. I picked her up with one arm and squeezed her backside. Will you question my decisions again? She refused to submit. She accused me of cheating, of using fear to take advantage. So she challenged me, one hand tied behind my back, a fair fight. If I won, she'd obey me completely. I tied up my right hand. She didn't understand how outmatched she was. Xian Yue was genuinely skilled. She moved fast, shifting between fists and palm strikes with real power. She closed the distance and aimed a palm at my face. I tilted slightly, caught her arm with my one free hand, and in one motion dislocated her shoulder. Before she could react with her other arm, I'd already popped that joint too. Both arms useless, she collapsed to the ground. Tears filled her eyes. You don't fight fair. You don't follow any rules. A grown man should go easy on a woman. I told her the truth without softening it. Moves can be learned. Survival can't. Just now, if I were your enemy, I had 4 chances to kill you. You'd be dead 4 times over. I untied my hand. She stamped her feet in frustration, but the lesson had landed. Her father had warned her before she came. He'd told her my combat style was simple but lethal, that every movement I made existed for one purpose only, to kill. I wasn't someone you measured against normal fighters. I was a weapon shaped into human form. She needed to understand that before I could ever take her into danger. Xian Yue admitted defeat. I crouched in front of her and told her she wasn't allowed to resist whatever I did next. Her face turned red as I reached for her collar, but all I did was turn her around, take out a brush and ink, and draw a crooked turtle on her back. I told her she couldn't wash it off for 3 days. The cold brush on her skin made her shiver, and when I blew on the ink to dry it, she nearly lost her mind from embarrassment. I popped her shoulders back into place, and she bolted out of the room like a scared cat. She stayed for lunch, but could barely look at me, then fled home as fast as she could. The Mu sisters saw her flustered expression and knew exactly what had happened. They just giggled. After lunch, my thoughts turned serious. I'd come to this world, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Build a foundation, grow steadily, create something for myself and for the people around me. I went out to inspect my operations. The brick kiln was first, my oldest workshop, now running smoothly. Everyone had their role, and the 3rd batch of bricks was almost ready to fire. But we were desperately short on hands. The refugees had helped, but between the carpentry workshop, the smithy, and the new guard patrol, every person was already stretched thin. Wang San suggested recruiting workers from the neighboring village, Shango. We had enough stored food to feed extra mouths through winter. Shango was a much bigger settlement downstream, 300 or 400 able-bodied men compared to our 100-something. The 2 villages had a long history of conflict over water rights and fishing. Under the old village chief Wang Changsheng, Siwa village had been bullied constantly, and our people still carried that resentment. Now that Siwa village was thriving under my leadership, Shango's people had grown jealous. We'd nearly come to blows when my brickmaking muddied their downstream water. But hiring some of their villagers could ease tensions and lay groundwork for future expansion. A single small village wouldn't be enough for my ambitions forever. I asked who could handle negotiations with Shango. Wang San said Tian Laoba was the obvious choice. His wife came from there, and he'd handled all our previous dealings with them, including the water route for transporting supplies from the river fort. Tian Laoba was definitely the right man for this. I noticed Tian Laoba was missing from the rounds. Wang Shan told me the smithy was finished and Tian Laoba had gone to chop wood for the first firing. Thinking about Zhang Tiezue gave me a headache. His childhood sweetheart Ruhua was currently recovering in Wang Changxing's old compound, right alongside Wu Jiang. The smithy was far enough away that they hadn't crossed paths yet. Based on how protective Ruhua had been of Wu Jiang, I suspected those 2 were together now. Until I understood the full picture, I'd have to dodge the subject if Zhang Tiezue asked about her. The smithy had been built on a flattened hillside near the brick kiln. Tian Laoba and a dozen villagers had worked day and night to level the ground. There weren't enough bricks yet, so the building was still just wooden sheds, but the high-temperature furnace and equipment were ready. Zhang Tiezue looked like a different man, clean, energized, thick with muscle. only in his early 30s, at the peak of a blacksmith's strength. With his square jaw and small mustache, he actually looked more like a scholar than an ironworker, if you ignored the muscles. He told me the furnace could fire tonight. The junk weapons from the water fort would melt easily enough, but recasting them into proper equipment with just himself and 2 clueless apprentices would be slow going. The village blacksmith knew a little, but wasn't up to Zhang Tietsue's standards. I told him to forget about swords and fancy weapons for now. Priority was 100 spearheads, minimum. After that, farming tools, axes, plows, hoes. Spring planting would need proper equipment, and these captured weapons were low-grade iron anyway, better suited for simple tools than military blades. We had the captured greatly long swords for real fighting. Zhang Tietsue looked disappointed at such mundane work. I laughed and told him the simple stuff was mainly for training his apprentices. His real assignment was something far more challenging. I pulled out a blueprint from inside my coat. I designed a suit of armor I called the Peerless Armor. Interlocking scales layered like dragon skin, impervious to blades and spears. Not the standard chainmail with its gaps that the Greatly army used. I wanted something worthy of being passed down through generations, like the war armor of ancient emperors. Zhang Tietsue's eyes caught fire the moment he saw the design. He studied every detail, marveling at how the rings and plates locked together. Then he spotted the other blueprints poking out of my coat, matchlock guns, even cannons, and practically begged to see them. I shut that down. Those designs were far more complex than the armor. He'd earned them by proving he could build the Peerless Armor first. If he couldn't handle the armor, he wasn't ready for what came next. His eyes went wide. More difficult than this. For a craftsman who lived to push his skills to the limit, there was no better motivation. He swore he'd forge the armor and hold me to my promise. We shook on it. Motivating Zhang Tietsue was part of my plan. A skilled blacksmith would be invaluable for everything ahead. But my real urgency had darker roots. I'd be going to Tianyong City soon, and I needed to prepare for the worst. If the city fell and the Fengling army was destroyed, I'd need that Peerless Armor to fight my way out alive. A master craftsman would need at least 20 to 30 days to forge it, which is why I'd pushed to start the smithy immediately. If I managed to deliver the account book to the Fengling army, the city might be saved. But if I failed, or even if I succeeded, I'd likely be dragged into the war against the barbarians. Siwa village was still too fragile. One charge from 100 barbarian cavalry would wipe us out. I needed that armor as my personal lifeline. After finishing with Zhang Tietsue, I headed to Wang Chongxing's old compound to see Wu Jiang. It was time to have a real conversation. Wu Jiang was a ticking bomb. If I could control him, his royal Wei bloodline might someday let me rally armies and reshape the world. But if he tried to use me, I'd kill him without hesitation. Zhai Shanchuan was outside cleaning up, looking well-rested and grateful. Wu Jiang's entire entourage had shrunk to just 5 people. All the supplies Tianweishan had earned from the barbarian raid were now in Gao Lu Peak's hands, giving that rival gang a massive boost. They'd fled with nothing. I went in alone. Ruhua was tidying the courtyard. She and Wu Jiang were clearly close. I smiled at her and entered Wu Jiang's room. I started by asking if he knew why Zhai Rang had rebelled, testing whether he'd be honest with me. He sighed and told me the story. Zhai Rang had been saved by his adoptive father, who'd founded Tianweishan. After Wu Jiang took over and tried reforming the gang into something legitimate, Zhai Rang resisted. He framed it as an internal disagreement that escalated after the barbarian loot made Zhai Rang greedy. He explained he wasn't his father's biological son. His father had built the bandit stronghold, but never wanted Wu Jiang to be an outlaw. He'd hired tutors, sent Wu Jiang to study abroad, even had him take the imperial exams. Wu Jiang failed the exams repeatedly and returned to become the reluctant bandit chief. He didn't mention his Wei royal bloodline at all. I noted that. I asked what he wanted now. He offered to serve as my military advisor. He'd studied strategy and tactics extensively during his travels and believed my ambitions could use his knowledge. I tested him by asking his analysis of the Tianyong City situation. His answer was sharp. The barbarians were camped just 100 li from the city, yet Yozhou's other armies hadn't moved to help the Fengling army. This meant the whole situation was a trap designed to destroy the Fengling army, which answered only to the emperor. Someone powerful wanted to weaken imperial authority. He was right, though I suspected he was holding back. Based on what Wang Dinglu had told me, the forces trying to destroy the Fengling army were likely the Wei restoration groups. If Wu Jiang secretly wanted to rebuild his kingdom, letting the Fengling army die would serve his interests perfectly. So his next words mattered enormously. He said we should protect the Fengling army for the sake of the empire and Yozhou's people. I nodded. Then I played humble. I was just a small village chief with a handful of men, powerless to influence a war. What could I possibly do? I wanted to see what he'd suggest next. Wu Jiang's first suggestion was sharp: destroy Gaolu Peak. With the stolen weapons and armor, they'd already upgraded their entire force. Worse, 2 nearby villages supplied war horses for the Fengling army, and Gaolu Peak was already connected to them. Once they seized those horses, recruited refugees, and armed up, they'd become a serious regional power. He explained that the real difference between our empire and the barbarians came down to cavalry. The barbarians had stretched supply lines and would rest through winter. If we could keep the local horse farms intact and deliver those horses to the Fengling army on schedule, that meant over 1,000 extra cavalry, enough to raid, intercept supplies, and turn the tide. But he cautioned against rushing in. Other bandit groups across the region might start copying Gaolu Peak, merging and fighting each other for territory. If that happened, we could sit back and let them weaken each other, then swoop in to pick up the pieces. We'd grow stronger while showing the Fengling army our value. 3 birds with 1 stone. His plan aligned perfectly with my own thinking. Some civilians would suffer in the chaos, but that was unavoidable. Wu Jiang had proven he could think strategically. He was worth keeping as an advisor. I told him to rest and heal. Then I turned to another matter: Ru Hua, who was cleaning the courtyard. I carefully asked who she was to him. Wu Jiang laughed and said she was his adopted sister, nothing more. He'd rescued her from bandits years ago, and she'd stayed to repay the debt. She was still waiting for her family and could leave any time. He immediately tried to play matchmaker, offering her to me. I stopped him. I wasn't interested for myself. I had a man working for me who'd been searching for someone for years, and I thought Ru Hua might be a good match. Wu Jiang eagerly called her over. The moment Ru Hua heard it was about marriage, she got upset. She said she had a childhood sweetheart back home, someone she was promised to. She believed he was still alive, still looking for her. Tears streamed down her face, and she ran outside. My heart was actually happy hearing this. She was loyal to Zhang Tietzue even after all these years. She just didn't know he was right here. Wu Jiang pretended his wound was acting up, groaning dramatically. Ru Hua immediately dried her tears and rushed back in with his medicine. The man was a natural manipulator, useful talent. I sent Zhai Shanchuan to fetch Zhang Tietzue. I liked Zhai Shanchuan more every day, loyal to Wu Jiang, obedient to my orders, never questioned anything, just executed. A rare quality. Before long, Zhang Tietzue came running over with his hammer in hand, looking frantic. Zhang Tietzue came grumbling about being pulled away from work. I just smiled and led him inside the compound. He gawked at the fancy house, wondering why I didn't live here myself. Honestly, it was too far from my workshops, and as a former mercenary who'd slept in graveyards on missions, comfort wasn't my priority. Not yet. I pointed him toward a room and told him to go in. He pushed open the door and froze. Ru Hua had her back turned, holding Wu Jiang's medicine bowl. She heard the door and looked over her shoulder. Time stopped. For eyes met, and neither could breathe. The medicine bowl slipped from Ru Hua's trembling hands and shattered on the floor. Zhang Tietzue broke first. He rushed forward crying, grabbed her, and held on like she might vanish. Years of searching, years of believing the other might be dead, all collapsing into this single moment. They clung to each other sobbing for a full quarter hour without managing a single word. I pulled Wu Jiang out of the room to give them space. He understood immediately. When they finally emerged, they knelt before me and Wu Jiang together, knocking their foreheads on the ground over and over. Zhang Tietzue declared I was their savior, their second father. They wanted to hold their wedding in Siwa village in 3 days, with me and Wu Jiang standing in as family elders. We agreed on everything quickly. No fuss about dowries or gifts. Wu Jiang gave them 30 taels of silver as Ru Hua's family, and I provided fabric and jewelry. Ru Hua moved into Zhang Tietzue's house that same day. Starting the next morning, Zhang Tietzue became a man possessed. Whether it was gratitude or the energy from his wedding night, He threw himself into the smithy like a madman, hammering away as if every missed stroke would betray my kindness. 3 days later, we held the wedding feast. I brought out generous amounts of food and drink for the whole village. Some people from Shango village came to watch and saw tables loaded with chicken, duck, fish, and meat. Their eyes burned with envy, but they couldn't join in. They had no gift money to offer. Winter had arrived, wild vegetables were scarce, and Shango's people had been watching Siwa village prosper with growing frustration. That wedding feast was the tipping point. The morning after the celebration, I was still half asleep when Tian Laoba's shouting jolted me outside. In the open space before my yard stood 14 families from Shango village, carrying their belongings, clutching house deeds and land titles. Every one of them begged to join Siwa village permanently. In these times, there was no real household registration system. You could live wherever you could survive. These people weren't stupid. They knew admission required payment, so they offered their property deeds as entry tickets. I told them honestly that Shango land deeds weren't very useful to me since I'd need people there to manage the properties. But I'd buy them out at fair silver prices. Siwa village had plenty of empty houses, and as village chief, I had the authority to assign them. They agreed to anything. I had them line up while the Moose sisters set up a registration desk and began appraising each family's assets. I promised everyone a fair deal. Whatever their deeds were worth, they'd receive equal value in housing, grain, or meat. The Great Snow Festival was approaching. I told them they were welcome to celebrate their first holiday as people of Siwa village. The new villagers knelt in gratitude. I told them my only rule: I'd feed them, but betrayal was unforgivable. This was working perfectly for my long-term plans. By acquiring Shango property deeds, I was laying the groundwork to eventually absorb the entire village. Combine both villages with the surrounding mountains and Tianwaishan's territory, and I'd essentially be a local lord. Even the government would have to respect my authority. Lin Xiaoxi arrived with her patrol team, one arm still bandaged from the sword wound at Tianwaishan. Despite the injury, she'd been training her guards daily and patrolling twice a day. Her dedication impressed me, though I still couldn't fully trust her motives. Protecting your leader was a guard's basic duty. It didn't automatically earn blind trust. She might be performing for my benefit. Still, I wasn't heartless. Good work deserved reward. I took her to a workshop I'd set up near Zhuzi's carpentry shed. Several women from Lin Xiaoxi's refugee group had been reassigned from cooking duties to leather armor production. These women had survived famine and near death. They were grateful, hardworking, and never cut corners. Under my guidance, they'd already disassembled the barbarian leather armor we'd captured and reassembled a prototype following my new design. My redesign split the solid chest piece into 8 interlocking panels that overlapped for better protection while conforming to the body's shape. I'd improved the wrist guards, shoulder plates, ankle protection, and knee covers. The whole suit was lighter and more flexible without losing any defensive strength, using a combination of hemp cord and iron wire stitching for durability. The woman in charge was Xiaomei, a dark-skinned, quiet mother of 2 who worked with meticulous care. I noticed something subtle between her and Lin Xiaoxi when we entered, a tenderness in their eyes toward each other. Probably relatives, or something like sisters from their journey together. I told Lin Xiaoxi the first completed suit was hers, a reward for taking that blade meant for me. She couldn't believe it. Armor like this was nearly impossible to get as a civilian. Even the county garrison soldiers didn't have sets this good. Only officers ranked captain and above qualified. She tried to refuse, saying it was too valuable, but her eyes betrayed her desperate wanting. I told her to put it on. When she was fully suited up, the overlapping plates clinked as she moved, making her already strong frame look even more imposing. I was satisfied. This was just the prototype. Eventually, I'd outfit Wang Dinglu and all my inner circle with leather armor. My own peerless armor would take time, so I'd need a custom leather set to tide me over. Lin Xiaoxi thanked me profusely and marched off practically glowing. After she left, Xiaomei approached shyly, her face burning under her dark skin. She handed me a wrapped package, something else I'd asked her to make. The craftsmanship was excellent. I told her she'd done great work. I was pleased with the women's craftsmanship, far better needlework than the village women. I gave Xiaomei a few copper coins as a bonus and hurried home with the package. I designed something special for the Moose sisters, a new type of undergarment based on modern designs from my past life. In this era, women only had simple wrapping cloths or basic bodices. I'd drawn up proper fitted garments and had the workshop women sew them to my wife's exact measurements. The sisters were embarrassed beyond words when they realized what the items were, insisting I leave the room. Ancient customs considered such intimate clothing unlucky for men to touch. I laughed that off. I designed the things myself and helped them try everything on. The results were exactly what I'd hoped for. I made mental notes to design several more varieties. That afternoon, the Shango villagers finished settling in. They'd exchanged their property deeds for houses in Siwa village, with a small surplus converted to grain. Importantly, I didn't give them any farmland. Keeping them dependent on me for work and food maintained my control. Generous enough to earn loyalty, strategic enough to preserve authority. After everything was sorted, I did a full inventory of remaining empty houses. This batch of 17 households temporarily solved our labor shortage. But come spring with massive fields to plant, we'd need even more people. I'd have to keep recruiting through winter. These particular families were ideal. Anyone who still held property deeds in times like these was honest and hardworking. Lazy people would have gambled their land away long ago. And families with wives and children were the easiest to manage. They had too much to lose. A few quiet days passed before Mu Xiaoyang came for his regular constable rotation and brought troubling news. Just as Wu Jiang had predicted, Gao Lu Peak had attacked the nearest horse farm, killed the guards, and stolen over 200 war horses. They'd also been absorbing the flood of refugees from Ningzhou, swelling their ranks to over 200 fighters. No local county had the strength to deal with them anymore. Reports had gone up to the prefecture and the Fengling army, begging for action. But Tianyong City's garrison was stretched impossibly thin. Only 5,000 Fengling soldiers facing 50,000 barbarians across the border. They couldn't spare a single man for bandits. The Empire's most elite army was trapped behind walls, afraid that any move would let the barbarians surround them. Mu Xiaoyang sat drinking tea while filling me in on the military situation. I was shocked to learn the Fengling army only had 5,000 soldiers. He explained the emperor relied on just two forces, the Fengling army and the Iron Armor army. The Iron Armor army had about 10,000 men guarding the capital, while the Fengling army's brutal selection standards kept their numbers at 5,000. For the ruler of an empire, having fewer than 20,000 loyal troops was dangerously thin. Mu Xiaoyang said the best hope was that the barbarians would retreat after heavy snow. But I knew better. Normally, barbarian invasions happened in autumn and retreated before winter because their supply lines couldn't sustain a long campaign. Their confederation of 18 major tribes and dozens of smaller ones under the Great Khan meant fractured command and no farming tradition. But everything had changed. The supply base we destroyed proved someone inside the empire was feeding the barbarians. With guaranteed provisions, they could outlast the Fengling army indefinitely. The only real solutions were either exposing the traitors or the Fengling army defeating the barbarians before winter set in fully. Neither was easy. Then Mu Xiaoyang shifted to lighter topics. The Great Snow Festival was approaching, and he'd heard I was heading to Tianyong City for the martial competition. He asked about my preparations and joked that a capable man like me deserved many wives. I laughed. I knew his own wife, the butcher's daughter, was a terror who'd never let him even think about concubines. I told him I wasn't worried about the competition. Then he leaned in conspiratorially and asked about the sister's childhood friend they wanted me to meet. I'd almost forgotten about that. According to Mu Xiaoyang, this woman was extraordinary. Her father was Tianyong City's garrison commander, and her two brothers were both senior officers in the Fengling army, ranked 4th grade or above. He said if I could win her over, my path to greater things would be paved. Then he added the real point. Don't forget your poor relatives when you make it big. I laughed, but made a mental note. Those two little wives of mine had connections to a major military family and hadn't told me the full picture. After Mu Xiaoyang left for the horse farm, I pulled Wan Qing onto my lap and asked about the friend's letter. She squirmed and admitted the woman had agreed to meet during the Great Snow Festival but wanted to establish 3 conditions before any marriage, though she hadn't specified what they were. When I asked to see the letter, Wan Qing turned red and claimed she'd accidentally burned it. I knew she was hiding something, probably unflattering things she'd written about me. After some persuasion, she finally handed it over. The letter read, "Dear sisters, I have no particular desire to marry. But since you both insist on recommending your husband, I'll meet him. When I return home for the Great Snow Festival, we can talk. Signed, Xiaoshan." The handwriting struck me, elegant yet powerful, with the disciplined grace of someone trained in classical calligraphy. Every stroke carried authority. This was clearly a woman raised in a military household, someone of real substance. The sisters had told me their friend's full name was Linghu Xiaoshan. Her brothers were Linghu Chongshan and Linghu Yuanshan. The Linghu clan was originally an ethnic minority family that had assimilated into Han culture generations ago, producing military officers ever since. Powerful connections indeed. A few peaceful days passed. I checked on workshops, spent time with my wives, and enjoyed the calm. Then one morning I rode out early to inspect the Shango properties I'd acquired, then headed to the horse farm. Tian Laoba greeted me with good news. Several mares were pregnant. My stallion Wu Jue had been busy. That horse was something else. Jealous of Wu Zhang's chestnut mare getting better feed, constantly trying to kick it. Despite being smaller than the purebred Great Li horse, Wu Jue had fathered most of the pregnancies. When I rode him around the farm, he pranced and whinnied at the other stallions like a bully showing off his master's favor. Lin Xiaoxi found me at the farm, looking urgent. She reminded me about the Han prisoner we'd captured at the barbarian camp, the one she'd been interrogating for weeks. He'd finally talked. I galloped over immediately. The man had been broken down completely. He sat eating roast chicken and drinking wine, his reward for confessing. Lin Xiaoxi handed me several pages of recorded testimony, casually mentioning she couldn't read. I didn't believe that for a second. She was being smart by claiming ignorance to avoid knowing dangerous secrets. I read the confession. With every line, my blood ran colder. By the end, I handed the pages back to Lin Xiaoxi. "Burn these. Right now." She looked shocked. She'd spent half a month extracting this information. But I was deadly serious. I told her to kill the prisoner, leave no trace, and personally watch everyone who'd been involved in the interrogation or recording. If any of them talked, they'd die too. The mastermind behind the barbarian supply operation was one of the Great Li dynasty's 8 grand eunuchs, remnants of the previous emperor's inner circle that the new emperor wanted to eliminate but couldn't touch yet. These weren't simple palace servants. In the Great Li system, the grand eunuchs wielded enormous political power, capable of manipulating the entire court. How was I supposed to fight that? My enemy stood just one step below the throne, and I was a village chief playing with mud. This was like bringing a stick to fight a god. I rode straight to the smithy, my face dark. Zhang Tietzue was working on my peerless armor. I asked how much molten iron he had ready. He looked confused, but helped me cast iron pellets and iron nails for half an hour. He couldn't understand what these tiny things were for. I grabbed a clay pot from nearby, just the right size. I packed it with iron pellets and nails, shook it tight, and mentally calculated how much gunpowder would fit inside. A hand grenade. My first one in this world. Zhang Tietzue stared at the strange contraption and asked what possible use it could have. I just grinned and told him he'd find out soon enough. I needed him to make plenty more of these little metal pieces whenever he had spare time. I had to prepare for the worst. If I was going up against one of the most powerful people in the Empire, I needed weapons that could change the rules of the game. I didn't bother explaining the grenade to Zhang Tietzue. He probably thought it was something you'd throw at someone's head. I went home to fill it with gunpowder, insert a fuse, and seal it with clay. In this era, this little device was practically invincible. My dagger worked for close encounters, but my crossbow was too bulky to carry everywhere. Walking into Tianyong City with a giant weapon strapped to my back would make me look insane and attract all the wrong attention. But grenades were small, easy to hide, and devastating. One could flatten a crowd within 30 meters. I tested it alone in the mountains. The explosion radius exceeded 50 meters, with lethal shrapnel range of at least 30. Satisfied, I made several more. The Great Snow Festival arrived. I gathered all my key people, assigned responsibilities for while I was away, and set out with the Mu sisters. We stopped first at their father's home in Wenhuang County. After a long talk, I finally convinced the old man to move to Siwa village as our doctor, something we desperately needed. 2 days of travel brought us to Tianyong City. We found an inn, rested, then explored. The city was alive with festival preparations. lanterns, decorations, merchants everywhere. Since I'd be visiting the Linghu family, appearances mattered. I bought proper clothes for myself and dressed the sisters up beautifully. A wife's appearance reflects her husband's standing. The sisters had never seen a city this grand. They were giddy, buying small gifts for everyone back home. An entire morning of shopping cost less than 2 taels of silver, but they were overjoyed. Meanwhile, I was drowning in bags. Confirmation that shopping with women is universally terrible across any era. Back at the inn, we'd barely settled in when soldiers knocked on our door. Tall, well-equipped men in leather armor, too professional for local garrison troops. These were Fengling army soldiers conducting sweeps of inns and taverns, hunting for spies. Their sergeant questioned why we were here. I calmly explained we'd come for the festival. He glanced past me at the sisters inside, seemed satisfied, and warned us not to carry weapons on the streets. He almost said something more, probably about the barbarian army camp just 50 li away, but caught himself. Military discipline kept him from spreading fear. The Fengling army had taken over city defense alongside the Linghu family's garrison. Their patrols were thorough for catching outside spies, but I knew the real threat came from traitors already inside. No amount of insurges would catch a Grand Eunuch's agents. Wan Qing was shaken by the tense atmosphere and suggested we leave right after Xiang Yue's martial competition. I held her close and told her not to worry. Early the next morning, someone pounded on our door. I opened it half asleep. There stood Wu Xiang Yue, dressed to perfection, fuming that I was still in bed with the competition starting in an hour. She pinched my arm hard and demanded to know why I wasn't taking this seriously. Xiang Yue was pouting at the door, furious that I was still sleeping. I had no idea how she'd even found our inn. The sisters came out and calmed her down. Wan Qing gave her one of the little gifts she'd bought, and Xiang Yue's mood flipped instantly. I threw on my coat, grabbed a quick bite, and followed the three of them to the arena. The competition was set up in the center of Tianyong City's main street. Word had spread months ago, and over 100 eligible men had shown up. The first elimination round was simple: draw the ancestral hard bow. Most couldn't manage it. By the end, only 6 of us remained, plus 2 men with special status who'd been given direct entry to the finals. Xiang Yue had pointed out the key opponents beforehand. One was Long Xiaoyun, a Fengling army lieutenant general in his 40s, experienced, skilled, wearing full armor. The other was Zhang Renzi, the prefect's second son, already married with several wives but obsessed with Xiang Yue's beauty. She warned me to be careful and avoid injuring anyone seriously. Accountant Ji was the announcer. The rules were straightforward. Defeat 3 opponents consecutively to earn the right to face Xiang Yue herself. Everyone got 2 chances maximum, with additional rounds if too many finalists remained. Before Ji finished talking, I clapped him on the shoulder and told him there was no need for long explanations. With me here, nobody else would be left standing. He grinned and confessed he'd bet heavily on me. The old fox was trying to get rich off my fists. I leapt onto the platform, but someone had beaten me there. A massive bald man, all muscle, flexing like he was at a beauty contest. Long Xiaoyun glided up calmly and beckoned him forward. The big man roared and charged like a human tank. Long Xiaoyun sidestepped effortlessly, landed a punch to his ribs, followed with a flurry, then dropped him with an uppercut to the jaw. The giant crumpled. All show, no substance. Big muscles mean nothing without combat training. A second challenger climbed up, this one with some martial arts background and a dangerous look. But against a man who'd earned his rank through real military combat. He lasted only a few moves before going down. Long Xiaoyun's strikes were deceptively simple. Every blow targeted vital points with snake-like precision. Nobody else dared go up. Zhang Renzi smirked and started to dramatically lift his robe to show off his expensive clothes before climbing the stage. As a prefect's son, he considered most opponents beneath him. He wanted to beat Long Xiaoyun specifically to establish dominance. I didn't give him the chance. I pushed off the platform's edge and landed on the stage light as a feather. Long Xiaoyun's expression tightened immediately. He recognized that kind of body control wasn't normal. He shifted into an attack stance. Zhang Renzi paused below, studying me with interest. He could tell from that single jump that my power control was extraordinary. I glanced down at Zhang Renzi and his flashy robes with open disgust. That moment of distraction was all Long Xiaoyun needed. He lunged forward with startling speed, appearing right in front of me. Looking away during a fight will get you killed, he growled, launching his attack. Long Xiaoyun was no pampered nobleman. He'd earned his rank through years of real battlefield combat, and he'd spotted what he thought was my moment of weakness. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. Up on the viewing platform, Xiang Yue was gripping her chair in panic. Wu Santong sat calmly sipping tea. He'd seen me destroy the water fort and fight through Tian Weishan's rebellion. He knew Long Xiaoyun would last 3 moves at best. Long Xiaoyun's punch came with serious power. I let him think he'd caught me off guard. That was the trap. The instant his fist arrived, I deflected it, locked my hand around his neck, and squeezed. His vision went dark and his legs gave out. He collapsed without ever understanding what I'd done. The crowd went silent with shock. Zhang Renzi watched intently from below, thinking he'd figured out my technique. The arrogant fool convinced himself I wasn't much and he could beat me in 3 moves. He climbed onto the stage to thunderous chatter. I overheard people praising him. Trained since childhood, taught by an Imperial Guard instructor, could take on a dozen men alone. Turns out he'd paid shills 1 tael of silver to hype him up in the crowd. Pathetic. He greeted me with nauseating condescension, saying he wouldn't use his full strength since he could easily kill me, but preferred gentle sparring. I just stared at him. The man's ego was astonishing. Xiang Yue couldn't take it anymore and jumped up beside me. She whispered urgently that Zhang Renzi was genuinely dangerous and I needed to fight seriously. Even crippling him would be acceptable. They'd look the other way. I smiled and told her she clearly didn't know her own husband's capabilities. I sent her back to her seat. Zhang Renzi's face turned murderous watching our intimate exchange. In his mind, Xiang Yue already belonged to him. Seeing her worry about another man drove him into a rage. His killing intent was so obvious it made me laugh. He looked like a child waving a knife around, threatening in his own imagination, comical in reality. He attacked with everything. Rapid combinations aimed at my head and body. I dodged every punch with my hands behind my back, treating him like a performing monkey. His fury doubled. He went low, sweeping at my legs. I lifted 1 foot, spun, and drove my knee down onto his leg, pinning him into a forced kneel. His bones creaked under the pressure. He tried an elbow strike. I spotted the opening, grabbed his arm, and dislocated his shoulder with 1 motion. He screamed, then reached for his waist with his remaining hand. A folding fan. He flicked it open and launched a hidden blade straight at my throat. So he wanted to kill me. Fine. I bent backward, letting the blade whistle past my neck, rolled, and swept his face with a spinning kick. The impact launched him off his feet. He spat blood, along with 2 teeth. He howled that he'd kill me, then grabbed his dislocated arm with his good hand and wrenched it back into the socket. He forced his damaged knee straight and staggered upright, eyes burning with murderous rage. Zhang Renzi came at me like a wounded tiger, limping but radiating murderous intent. When he looked at me, he finally noticed my expression had changed, cold, looking down at him like he was nothing. Accountant Ji had asked me not to hurt this pampered brat. Xiang Yue had told me to cripple him. I'd planned to simply win by disabling his joints. But that hidden blade aimed at my throat changed everything. He tried to kill me. That was his choice. I walked toward him in silence. My steps were steady, my face hard. For the first time, he realized I wasn't afraid of him or his father's power. Panic flickered in his eyes. He screamed that he wanted weapons and a fight to the death. Wu Santong tried to intervene from the platform, explaining this was supposed to be a friendly competition. Zhang Renzi didn't care. He snatched a long sword from a nearby escort and charged at me, swinging with everything he had. I watched his footsteps, calculated the distance, then stomped the wooden platform. A broken plank flipped up and struck him squarely between the legs. He went purple, dropped the sword, clutched himself, and rolled on the ground screaming. I walked over, kicked the weapon away, and gave him one last chance. Surrender now, and I'd stop. Keep fighting, and I'd make him a cripple for life. He lunged up and grabbed my throat with both hands. I shook my head. Some people just don't want to live. I seized his hand midair, locked all 5 fingers, and crushed them one by one. The cracking sounds were sharp and clear. It looked effortless, but it required immense grip strength and the willingness to be ruthless. His internal meridians were now displaced too. He'd be lucky to hold chopsticks again, let alone touch a woman. He screamed and passed out. Wu Santong and Accountant Ji rushed to have him carried away for treatment. A prefect's son dying on the stage would mean serious trouble. Xiang Yue, on the other hand, was bouncing with excitement. The announcer called for more challengers. Dead silence. Nobody moved. After watching Long Xiaoyun and Zhang Renzi both get demolished, no one wanted to be next. The crowd murmured about where this terrifying stranger had come from. Then a powerful voice cut through everything like thunder. What are you all doing? Don't you know the situation this city faces? You have time for games, but not for fighting the enemy. A man in his 50s strode through the crowd, tall, commanding, wearing silver armor with an eagle crest on his helmet, hand resting on the long sword at his hip. Behind him marched a column of soldiers in perfect formation. General Linghu. The crowd parted in awe, bowing and praising him as their protector against the barbarians. So this was the garrison commander, Linghu Xiaoshan's father. He ordered everyone to disperse, warning that barbarian raiding parties had been launching small attacks recently and civilians should stay inside the city. The crowd scattered immediately, but before leaving, he gave me a long, measuring look. He'd watched me handle Zhang Renzi from a distance. I could tell he was intrigued, wondering where this unknown fighter had come from and why he'd never heard of me. Uncle Linghu, the sisters called out. The old general blinked, then broke into a warm smile when he recognized them. He asked why they hadn't told him they were coming to Tianyong City, then noticed me standing beside them. Wan Qing shyly introduced me as their husband. The general's expression shifted. He studied me carefully, then burst into hearty laughter. He said I had spirit and skill, that the whole city probably couldn't produce my equal. He told the sisters to bring me to his estate tomorrow for the Great Snow Festival and asked me to spar with his two worthless sons. Then he slapped my shoulder, laughed again, and marched off with his troops as quickly as he'd arrived. Xiang Yue asked if we still needed to fight. I laughed and asked if she thought she could beat me. Before she could answer, I swept her up in my arms right there in public. The lingering crowd watched in disbelief. Two beautiful women had already claimed me as their husband, and now I was carrying off a third. I could practically hear single men across the square dying inside. Back at the inn, we settled the marriage arrangements with Wu Santong. Xiang Yue insisted on a simple wedding the moment we returned to the village. No fuss, no delay. Wu Santong had accepted me as his son-in-law long ago, so formalities were minimal. He headed back to Wenhuan County while we stayed an extra day for the Linghu visit. The next morning, we bought gifts and walked to the Linghu estate. The compound was enormous. 3 generations of wealth and military prestige on full display. Blue brick walls, crimson roof tiles, an imperial golden plaque above the gate, and Fengling army soldiers standing guard. The military camp was just 2 streets away. Despite their power, the Linghu family had an excellent reputation. Civilians regularly left fresh vegetables, eggs, and meat at their doorstep. The family donated everything to the army to improve soldiers' meals. In the middle of a famine, that kind of generosity was enough to make you emotional. Wan Qing pointed out that despite the barbarian army camped 50 li away, the people here showed no panic. They celebrated the festival freely because they trusted General Linghu. She was proud. The old steward recognized the sisters immediately and welcomed us warmly, complimenting how the girls had grown into beautiful women and sizing me up with approving nods. The estate was quiet compared to the bustling streets. Few servants, but Fengling soldiers posted at every key position gave the whole place a serious military atmosphere. The steward led us to a small courtyard and said the young lady had returned yesterday and was waiting. He left us at the gate. Along the way, the sisters had explained the family connection. Their father had once lived in the capital with a chance to join the Imperial Medical Bureau, where he'd befriended the young Linghu Zheng. The family stayed close even after Linghu Zheng rose to become Tianyong City's garrison commander. The sisters and Linghu Xiaoshan had been childhood playmates, separated by distance, but connected through letters for years. I pushed open the half-closed courtyard gate. Inside, beneath a stone pavilion, sat one of the most striking women I'd ever seen. She wore simple, elegant clothes under a vivid red cloak, holding a book in slender fingers. A small brazier of silver charcoal glowed beside her. She looked up as we entered. Her eyes were bright and full of intelligence, her lips curving into a smile that radiated both warmth and quiet authority. "Come sit down, don't catch cold," Linghu Xiaoshan called to the sisters warmly. Then her gaze settled on me. She gave a polite nod, but I caught something hidden beneath the softness, the subtle pressure of someone accustomed to authority. That wasn't the look of a sheltered, noble daughter. I introduced myself simply. The three women quickly steered conversation toward testing me, almost as if they'd rehearsed it. Xiaoshan mentioned her father had praised my fighting and said her two brothers would spar with me when they returned. I told her I'd welcome the chance. I'd heard the Fengling army was full of experts. Snow began falling. Xiaoshan watched it with delight, mentioning she'd been born on a snowy day like this. I steered the conversation toward something more pointed. Now that it's snowing, the barbarian army should be retreating, right? They should, she answered instantly, then caught herself, as if she'd said too much. I don't think so, I said. I'm 9/10 certain they'll wait until spring and attack then. Her eyes sharpened. She asked what I meant. I smiled and told her it was classified. She wasn't important enough to know. That made her angry. The sisters jumped in to smooth things over, mentioning I'd captured a barbarian scout near our village. They were trying to help, not knowing the full scope of what I'd discovered. Xiaoshan demanded to know who I thought was qualified to hear my intelligence. I told her, only the Fengling army's commander, the legendary female general herself. The information was so dangerous that leaking it to the wrong person could doom the entire empire. I casually mentioned the Fengling army's 4 vice commanders, known as Wind, Forest, Fire, and Mountain. She confirmed this without hesitation. I'd love the chance to fight those generals someday, I said wistfully. What a shame I have no connections to the Fengling army. That's not difficult at all, she said. Those 4 words told me everything. A normal young woman wouldn't speak so casually about arranging meetings with the empire's top military commanders. Combined with her commanding presence and the way she'd reflexively answered my military questions, Linghu Xiaoshan was either the female general herself or someone very close to her. With 2 brothers as senior Fengling officers and a father commanding the garrison, it would be easy for her to serve in the army disguised as a man. But I wouldn't tip my hand here. You don't negotiate matters of national security in a garden pavilion over tea. The right information needed the right setting. Then she suddenly turned to the sisters and said, I agree to the marriage. Everyone froze, including me. Moments ago, we'd been verbally sparring. Now she was accepting? Was she trying to get close to me for the intelligence? Using herself as bait? The sisters asked if her father would approve. She said her parents didn't interfere with her marriage decisions. Then she excused herself and left. Before I could process what had just happened, loud laughter echoed from outside. 2 men in black and white armor strode in, her brothers. Linghu Chongshan, the elder, was lean with piercing hawk-like eyes. Linghu Yuanshan, the younger, was stocky and broad with an easygoing air. Both moved with the steady, grounded footwork of trained fighters. The 2 brothers burst in with zero subtlety. They'd heard from their father about my fighting skills and came rushing back to see for themselves, already wanting to spar. Xiaoshan stomped her foot and ordered them to return to camp immediately. When they asked why, she said it was because he wants to see General Nangal. The brothers froze, exchanged a look with her, and instantly understood. Meeting the Grand General? Wonderful. We can arrange that easily. We drink with General Long all the time. Xiaoshan glared at them, silently calling them idiots for revealing too much. She told them to take me to General Long first since I had classified intelligence. They agreed cheerfully, completely oblivious to how many military secrets they'd just leaked in casual conversation. I left the Moose sisters at the estate and followed the brothers out. They insisted on taking a carriage instead of horses, and the ride was suspiciously slow. On the way, they asked about the marriage. When I told them Xiaoshan had agreed, the elder brother slapped his thigh with delight. They warned me their sister was difficult to deal with. I told them I had my methods. I'd already figured it out. Xiaoshan was in the Fengling army. Marrying her meant she'd be away constantly, possibly seeing me only once every few years. She probably just wanted the formal status of being married. For me, it was still a perfect deal. A beautiful wife, powerful military connections, and complete freedom. The carriage crawled along so slowly I realized it was deliberate, giving someone time to get into position ahead of us. When we finally arrived at the military camp, I caught a figure darting through the gates just before we stepped out. The Fengling army camp was immaculate. Every tent precisely placed, every soldier sharp-eyed and confident. These weren't conscripts grabbed off the street. Each one had been handpicked from across the Empire's armies. The camp was divided into 4 sections around a central command tent, each led by one of the 4 vice commanders: Wind, Forest, Fire, Mountain. Each flew different banners. General Long commanded the cavalry under the Wind banner, twin-headed storm wolves. I had to suppress a laugh at the design. Inside his command tent, General Long Ju stood over a battle map, studying troop positions. He was blunt and direct, asked who I was and what I wanted. A true soldier. The Linghu brothers explained I'd crippled Zhang Renzi in the fighting competition. Long Ju's eyes lit up, and he immediately offered me a captain's commission in the Fengling army. I thanked him, but said I needed to see the Grand General, Commander Nangong herself. I had intelligence about the barbarian army that could only be shared with her directly. Long Ju's expression hardened. Requesting an audience with the Supreme Commander over his head was unusual. Military protocol meant whoever recruited you claimed you as their subordinate. But I held firm, telling him the matter was critical and that the Grand General already knew about it. Right on cue, practically confirming that someone had rushed ahead to prepare, a soldier burst into the tent with urgent orders. General Long, the Grand General summons you immediately. General Long sighed and told me I'd basically been using his tent as a waiting room. But he grabbed his helmet and said, "Let's go. I'll count you as a friend." The Linghu brothers were already waiting at the central command tent along with other officers. The 4 vice commanders entered first. After a moment, Long Ju came back out and gave me an odd look. "Come in." Inside, a corridor led to a massive screen blocking the view of the inner chamber. The 4 generals, Wind, Forest, Fire, Mountain, stood flanking the screen's only gap. A freshly placed screen, obviously never used before. The setup couldn't have been more transparent. I asked where the Grand General was. Long Ju robotically answered that the general was behind the screen and I should deliver my intelligence now. Clearly rehearsed. I refused. I'm not talking to a screen. For all I know, you've tied a dog back there and called it the Grand General. This information is too important to be careless. From behind the screen came a furious, slightly altered voice. "Insolent fool. Drag him out and give him 20 military lashes." The giant general called Ing Bu, the mountain, guardian of formations, reached for me with genuine menace. Then he heard 20 lashes and froze, hand hovering in midair. 20 lashes? In the Fengling army? That was absurdly light. He turned back toward the screen, confused. I laughed. "You want to grab me? Better think about who I'm about to become. I'm your Grand General's future husband." She disguised her voice, but I'd spent enough time talking with Linghu Xiaoshan earlier to recognize it instantly. Chaos erupted. The 4 generals stared at each other in disbelief. Behind the screen, something crashed, a teacup knocked over by a nervous hand. What nonsense are you spouting?" Her voice cracked with embarrassment. Then she tried to recover. "Fine, let him through." The generals parted. Behind the screen sat Linghu Xiaoshan, face flushed, wearing the same clothes from the garden except her red cloak had been swapped for black. Tea dripped off the table. She demanded I speak. I shook my head. She was my future concubine Linghu Xiaoshan, not proven to be Grand General Nangong Qiushui. Unless she confirmed her identity, I wouldn't share anything. The 4 generals nearly choked. Their legendary commander, the most celebrated general in the Empire, had just been called someone's concubine. Xiaoshan stared at me with murderous intensity, then went quiet for a long time. She finally understood. I'd been maneuvering her deliberately, using the marriage as leverage to force her to reveal herself on my terms. Every time she lost composure, I gained control. "You're testing me," she said, suddenly calm. Her eyes cleared completely. No anger, no embarrassment. Pure, steady focus. I clapped. "Now that's Nangong Qiushui. The Emperor gave you that name to be like autumn water, still, undisturbed by anything." She looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not hatred, respect. I began my briefing. I explained that by historical pattern, the barbarians should have retreated weeks ago due to supply shortages. Yet their army of 50,000 had been camped for 2 months with no signs of hunger. Fires burning daily, meat and wine flowing freely. Something was feeding them. Ji Bu, The mountain general, known for his analytical mind, immediately grasped the implication. The barbarians' sustained presence without supply problems pointed to one thing. Someone on our side was providing them resources. Jibu, the mountain general in charge of intelligence and defense, admitted they'd suspected something but couldn't confirm the scale of barbarian supplies since refugee reports about raided villages were unreliable. Zhongli Mei, the forest general commanding the archers and serving as the army's chief strategist, asked what I knew. I pulled out the account book from inside my coat. You may not realize this, but barbarian camps have spread across all of Yuzhou. I personally led the raid that destroyed 200 elite soldiers, along with massive stockpiles of imperial supplies. Everything is recorded in this ledger. 3 of the 4 generals refused to believe it. But the implications hit Long Zhu hardest. He managed the Fengling army's entire supply chain. If barbarian raiders had been positioned to cut his supply lines, and he hadn't known, his head would be the first to roll. I laid out my analysis. These camps had full infrastructure for long-term habitation, established at least 6 months ago. The barbarians had infiltrated Yuzhou in small groups over time, supported by traders within the imperial court. A single camp held enough supplies to feed tens of thousands. I estimated at least 10 such bases scattered across the province. The generals passed the account book around. When it returned to Xiaoshan, she exchanged a knowing look with Zhongli Mei. His earlier theory about Wei Kingdom remnants had been correct. Zhongli Mei spelled out the trap. If the Fengling army sent forces to hunt these hidden camps, Tianyong City would be left defenseless. If they ignored the camps, the raiders would eventually strangle their supply lines. Either way, they'd lose. Xiaoshan cut through the despair with a cold voice and turned to me. You brought the account book because you already have a solution. If this were truly hopeless, you wouldn't have bothered coming. So tell us, I smiled. She was sharp. I do have a plan. But information like this requires fair exchange. She offered anything. Official rank, silver, imperial commendations. I shook my head. What I want is a monopoly on salt and iron production. Permission from the emperor to raise a private army. A fief where I hold absolute authority over everything within its borders. The tent went silent. I was asking for the economic lifeblood of the entire nation. You. How dare you? Xiaoshan's eyes blazed, though I caught admiration hiding behind the anger. I laughed. Relax. I don't actually need those rewards to share my plan. But I do need one thing from you. What scheme are you plotting now? Simple. First, admit that I'm your chosen husband. Once you do, I'm just helping my own woman. Perfectly reasonable. Her face cycled through fury, shock, and finally settled on a deep blush. Inside the tent, you could hear every breath. Her handmaid was covering her mouth, trying not to laugh. The 4 generals stared at me like I was an alien creature. No one in the history of the Fengling army had ever dared tease the Grand General like this, let alone multiple times in one meeting. Long Zhu's expression said it all. This man is either the bravest or the craziest person alive. All 4 generals turned to watch Xiaoshan, waiting for the show to continue. Xiaoshan thought for a long time before answering carefully. You are Linghu, Xiaoshan's husband. I've already agreed to that. But this has nothing to do with Nangong Qiushui. She was splitting herself into 2 identities. I looked past her at the armor stand. A stunning set of custom-fitted female battle armor with a blue cape and a thin face mask that would cover everything except her eyes. When she wore that mask, she was Nangong Qiushui, the invincible general. Without it, she could be my wife. I understood immediately. Nangong Qiushui couldn't die, couldn't marry, couldn't be human. She was bigger than one person. The emperor was brilliant, I said. The barbarians have always mocked our military. So he created a female war goddess, telling the world that even our women are this terrifying. Imagine what our men can do. Nangong Qiushui isn't just a name. It's an ideal, a symbol. Linghu Xiaoshan is simply the person who carries that symbol. Her mouth fell open. Every word I spoke hit her like a hammer. The emperor himself had told her these exact things when he gave her the name. How could this village chief from nowhere see through the emperor's deepest intentions so effortlessly? I added what the emperor couldn't say aloud, that this was ultimately about control and balance. Imperial politics always was. She stared at me with the same look she'd once reserved only for the emperor, the realization that someone could see right through her. I shifted topics. Are there any bandit suppression requests pending? Jibu, the mountain general, confirmed they'd received multiple requests about Gaolu Peak, but had ignored them. Ingbu, the fire general commanding shock troops, protested that bandit hunting wasn't their job, while 50,000 barbarians sat outside the walls. I don't want you to fight bandits, I said. I want you to do nothing. I explained my plan. Gaolu Peak had stolen military horses after acquiring weapons from the barbarian camp. Other bandit groups across the region were watching the Fengling army's response. If the army stayed passive, every bandit gang would copy Gaolu Peak, fighting each other and attacking barbarian supply camps for their stockpiles. The hidden barbarian bases would be destroyed by local outlaws instead of imperial soldiers. Once the bandits had exhausted themselves fighting barbarians and each other, the Fengling army's 8 lieutenant generals could ride out and sweep them up effortlessly. The bandit problem and the barbarian infiltration problem would solve each other. The key is that Gaolu Peak's success with the stolen horses will inspire every other gang to do the same. Their greed becomes your weapon. I paused. The only cost is that some civilians near Tianyong City will suffer in the crossfire. Xiaoshan's face showed genuine shock. She'd commanded armies for years and never considered using bandits as unwitting pawns against a foreign enemy. My strategy was ruthless, devious, and effective. The 4 generals straightened their backs when I mentioned them finishing off the weakened bandits. Whatever else they thought of me, they were soldiers. Give them a fight, and they were happy. Xiaoshan made the decision without hesitation. She ordered the 4 generals to spread word about Gaolu Peak's success to bait other bandit groups, pull back all scouts to focus on catching barbarian informants inside the city, and tighten patrols throughout Tianyong City. The generals saluted in unison and acknowledged their orders. She turned to me. This plan earns you first merit if it works. Whether you want rewards or not, I'll report everything to the emperor after the campaign. The Fengling army rewards fairly. Then she dismissed everyone and had Long Ju prepare a carriage back to the estate. A minute later, we were alone inside the carriage, just the 2 of us. The driver didn't head home. Instead, he circled through the busy central streets. She'd arranged this deliberately, wanting private time to figure me out after I'd run circles around her in the command tent. We sat facing each other in silence, eyes locked, neither willing to look away first. Finally, she broke. Why do you keep staring at me? Because you're beautiful. She blinked, her long lashes fluttering. Is that the only reason you want to marry me? My looks. Exactly. You're gorgeous, I said. Then I listed her other qualities with complete sincerity. Her figure, her physical fitness from years of military training, her stamina that would surely surpass my other wives. I held nothing back. Her eyes went wide. Her brain seemed to short-circuit. In the tight carriage, our knees kept touching, and when I mentioned her being built for bearing sons, I felt her legs involuntarily clamp against mine before she caught herself. You're absolutely vulgar. A complete scoundrel, she managed, then yanked the curtain open and ordered the driver home. I kept admiring her silhouette. The curves were genuinely impressive. She could feel my gaze traveling over her and turned crimson, probably wanting to kill me. But I caught something else beneath her embarrassment. She was relaxing. Every other suitor who'd come to the Linghu estate had wanted her power, her connections, her status. They saw the general first and the woman second. I was the opposite. I genuinely didn't care about any of that. I'd build my own power, my own wealth, my own position. From her, I wanted nothing but herself. She was perceptive enough to recognize that, and it disarmed her completely. At the estate, she practically fled from the carriage. I strolled in after her, grinning. The sisters greeted me with warm calls of husband, barely restraining themselves from jumping into my arms in front of everyone. General Linghu had been chatting with them and had already extracted plenty of information about me. He'd even sent riders to check with their father, who'd praised me highly. As he watched his daughter storm past looking flustered and then saw me walk and laughing with his sons, the old general's eyes sparkled. He was clearly thinking, this marriage is happening. General Linghu had actually known about the marriage proposal since the sisters first sent their letter. That's why his attitude had shifted so quickly at the arena yesterday. He'd watched me fight and seen exactly what he needed. Decisive, ruthless, efficient. A dangerous enemy, but an excellent son-in-law. He casually suggested his 2 sons should spar with me to learn a few things. The brothers exchanged a knowing look. Their father was testing me through them. I couldn't refuse without insulting the family. So I set down my tea and followed them to the courtyard. 3 exchanges later, the elder brother was on the ground. Xiaoshan watched with a tight frown. The general seemed unbothered. He'd expected this. "So what do you think of Lu Feng?" he asked his daughter. "He's a scoundrel," she answered instantly. "And the marriage? I agree." The words flew out before she could stop them. She looked startled by her own answer, then blushed and glanced at the sisters, who were beaming. She tried to recover, "But I've set 3 conditions." Outside, the younger brother went down just as easily. Xiaoshan tried to grab her sword and challenge me herself, but her father pulled her back. He wasn't about to let her scare away the only man she'd ever accepted. "Sit down. If you're willing to marry, let's settle the details. You can fight him all you want afterward." Xiaoshan reluctantly sat and stated her 3 conditions. First, her identity as Nangong Qiushui must never be revealed. Second, she'd be away on campaigns constantly and couldn't fulfill normal wifely duties or bear children regularly, and I wasn't allowed to resent her for it. Third, the military camp was off limits unless I had critical business, which should go through her brothers. The courtyard went quiet. Those were harsh terms. I sipped my tea calmly, then smiled. "No," everyone stared. "All 3 conditions are rejected. The first one I'll honor because it's obviously important. But you don't get to dictate terms to me. If you want to set rules, let's see whose fists are bigger." "Fine." She was already furious about everything. My rejection, my arrogance, my casual dismissal of her authority. She drew her sword. "I've been wanting to teach you a lesson. Then let's make it interesting," I said. "If I win, I get my own 3 conditions." She hesitated, then scoffed. "Cheapskate. But you won't beat me." Her brother tossed me his sword. I drew it halfway, laughed, and tossed it back. I pulled out my dagger instead. Everyone in the Linghu family froze. She had a full-length sword. I had a small knife. Reach advantage was entirely hers. She told me not to handicap myself. I told her I was more comfortable fighting women with my other weapon, a joke that sailed over most heads. She attacked with brilliant swordsmanship, fast, precise, creative angles. I deflected everything with just the dagger. Sparks flew with every clash, but not a single strike got through. Her flurry of blade work, all neutralized by a few inches of steel. I pressed forward with the dagger, forcing Xiaoshan to retreat step by step. Her brothers assumed she was going easy on me. Only her father saw the truth. His daughter was fighting at 60% and still looked like a child against me. She made a desperate lunging thrust. I sidestepped, flipped the dagger to deflect the blade upward, and disarmed her with a strike to the wrist. As her body stumbled forward from the momentum, my left arm caught her waist while my right hand, hidden from everyone's view, briefly touched somewhere it shouldn't have. Her mind went blank. She turned to me, face burning crimson, eyes murderous. "Had enough?" I grinned. She shoved my arm away and stormed back to the pavilion. Everyone assumed she was just upset about losing. Nobody noticed what had actually happened. She sat down and demanded I state my 3 conditions immediately, already prepared to reject whatever I said. "Haven't thought of them yet. I'll let you know after the wedding." She looked ready to tear me apart. She'd prepared her counterarguments, and I'd given her nothing to fight against. Her elder brother smoothed things over, and General Linghu asked about my background. Learning both my parents had passed, he took charge. "Once the barbarians retreat and peace returns to Tianyong City, we'll hold the wedding properly." Xiaoshan protested that it was too soon, claiming she wanted more time with her parents. Her father shut that down. She visited maybe 5 times a year. There was nothing to delay. I nodded my agreement. Xiaoshan had no ground left to stand on. Her father had decided. She'd already consented, and the marriage was set. The general hosted us for the Great Snow Festival dinner. Afterward, Xiaoshan pulled me into the study with a mission. She wanted me to destroy Gaolu Peak. The stolen war horses had been painstakingly gathered from across the empire for the Fengling army. Losing them to bandits was intolerable. If word got out and nothing was done, the army's reputation would suffer. But it had to be done quietly, without alerting other bandit groups, or the larger plan of using bandits against barbarian camps would collapse. She added another layer of complexity. After the other bandits seized military horses during their raids on barbarian camps, they couldn't be allowed to sell them or use them to build rebel armies. The Fengling army would bear responsibility if that happened. "Sounds difficult," I admitted. If it weren't difficult, would I be asking you? She tried to preempt my demands by invoking our engagement. Family doesn't charge family. I laughed and clapped. Fair enough. Since we're family and I'm about to risk my life on a dangerous mission, I won't ask for troops or supplies. Just one small thing, a kiss on the cheek. Surely my future wife wouldn't refuse something so tiny. I pointed to the side of my face. You, shameless scoundrel, she sputtered through every insult she could think of, but I noticed she didn't actually say no. Xiaoshan cursed me up and down, but then sighed. Fine. We're engaged anyway. Close your eyes. I closed them. I could feel her breath getting closer, hear her heartbeat racing. At the last second, I opened my eyes. Our faces were inches apart. Before she could react, I pulled her in and kissed her properly, gentle but firm. She froze completely. Her breathing stopped. Her whole body went rigid, then slowly softened. She'd never been kissed before, and she didn't even know to breathe through her nose. I had to pull back to let her gasp for air, then kissed her again. The study door was half open. The Mu sisters walked in and caught us. They stood there with hands over their mouths, eyes wide. Xiaoshan shrieked, broke free, and fled the room. The sisters just laughed, and each kissed me on a cheek. Wan Xing whispered with a blush, she'll get used to it after a few more times. We said our goodbyes to the Linghu family and started the journey home. The ride took 2 days with an overnight stop. Back at the village, the house was warm. The heated bed platform had been kept burning. The sisters and I settled in for the night. The next morning, I organized everything for the wedding with Xiangyue. The Mu sisters rallied every woman from the workshops to clean and decorate our compound. When villagers heard their chief was getting married, they were thrilled, partly because weddings meant feasts, but mostly out of genuine affection. Dozens went hunting in the snowy mountains to bring back game as gifts, all voluntarily. 3 days later, the wedding procession departed for Wunwang County. I rode Wuzhui in a red wedding suit the sisters had sewn. Behind me marched 50 or 60 people, Tian Laoba, the sedan carriers, and the full escort party. All volunteers. We arrived at evening, and I put everyone up for the night. Next morning, the Dei escort agency was packed and decorated with lanterns and red banners. Crowds gathered. In these hard times, a proper wedding was a rare celebration. At the gate, I told Jai Shanchuan to start throwing copper coins. We'd prepared 5,000, not a fortune, but enough for good luck and proper show. I wouldn't let anyone say the Wu family sent off their daughter cheaply. Coins rained down, and the crowd surged to grab them, clearing a path to the door. Inside, Wu Santong sat beaming in the main hall. I served him tea, the Yuzhou tradition marking the formal bond between families. Father-in-law, mother-in-law. The words felt right. Wu Jiang and Jai Shanchuan handled fetching the bride while I managed the ceremonies. Xiangyue waited in her red veil inside the sedan chair. Per local custom, we couldn't see each other until the final ceremony at home. When everything was done, I bowed to Wu Santong and his wife at the gate, mounted Wu Zhui, and gave the order. Jai Shanchuan, throw coins. Copper rained from the sky all the way through the city streets. The dowry wagons rolled behind us with the escort agency's men protecting them. Townspeople followed the procession cheering until we passed through the city gates. Inside the sedan chair, Xiangyue suddenly burst into tears. She'd finally realized that leaving meant the escort agency was no longer her home. It would be her parents' house, her childhood place, but never truly hers again. The procession wound through the snow back to Siwa village, where everything was ready. Lanterns and red decorations covered our compound. The Mu sisters helped Xiangyue out of the sedan and guided her inside, while I welcomed Wu Santong and his wife to the main hall. After Xiangyue composed herself, the sisters brought her out for the ceremony. First bow to heaven and earth. Second bow to the parents. Husband and wife bow to each other. The ceremony is complete. She was taken to the bridal chamber while I hosted the banquet. Villagers had brought mountains of gifts, all heartfelt offerings from people who genuinely cared. The celebration lasted until dark. Wu Santong and the others headed back to the county. When I finally entered the room with the ceremonial rod to lift her veil, Xiangyue was trembling on the bed's edge, hands clenched on her knees. Her voice shook when she called out to me. I lifted the veil and saw her face. Tears had smudged her light makeup, making her look both fierce and vulnerable at once. Beautiful. She managed one shy glance at me before losing all courage and dropping her gaze. That night, I learned that despite her bold personality, Xiangyue was completely innocent about married life. Her family of warriors hadn't thought to prepare her, and the rushed wedding left no time. Her mix of fear and curiosity made the night both sweet and memorable. The next morning, I rose early. The Mu sisters had already prepared hot water and were managing the household. I held their hands and told them to look after Xiangyue. Her first night as a married woman would leave her needing some kindness and rest. I ate breakfast and headed out. There was work to do. The wedding celebrations were over, and the real challenges, Gao Lu Peak, the barbarian threat, and everything else, were still waiting. I walked through falling snow to the horse farm. Something from last night's wedding feast was bothering me. I'd noticed villagers from Shango eating desperately, stuffing food into their clothes to take home. Their behavior nearly caused friction between our two villages. Tian Laoba confirmed what I suspected. Most Shango families had run out of food. The wealthier ones were surviving, and some had already joined Siwa village. But the rest were suffering badly, rivers frozen, mountains sealed by snow, nowhere to forage. Worse, Shango's village chief was exploiting the crisis. He was demanding families hand over their daughters as concubines in exchange for small grain loans. Girls as young as 11 or 12. Tian Laoba could barely contain his disgust. I shook my head. What was wrong with these village chiefs? Tian Laoba smiled and told me the opposite. For 10 villages around, everyone knew my name and gave me a thumbs up. Siwa village had food, warmth, and paid work. Other villages were deeply envious. My system wasn't charity. Villagers worked and earned wages. But through selling them firewood scraps from the kiln and smithy at near-nothing prices, and cycling most of their wages back through purchases, I kept costs low while maintaining control. Even so, Siwa village was paradise compared to everywhere else. An idea formed quickly. I told Tian Laoba to set up a trading stall in Shango that afternoon. We'd sell grain. I had massive reserves, purchase supplies, water fort stockpiles, barbarian camp plunder. Enough to feed Siwa village for a full year with leftovers. The hunting teams brought back premium game that Wu Santong traded south for more rice. Why let surplus sit in storage when I could use it to expand my influence? We loaded an ox cart with rice, vegetables, meat, and cooking oil, and set up in Shango. I announced that everything could be traded, labor, goods, property deeds, whatever people had. The crowd surged forward. But before anyone could trade, an old man pushed to the front. He was skeletal, barely clothed against the cold, dragging a frightened girl behind him. Do you take daughters? Mine is 14. I'd rather sell her to you than let our village chief ruin her. He dropped to his knees, begging. The girl was pretty, thin face, delicate features, tears streaming. Then the floodgates opened. Dozens of poor families dragged their daughters forward and knelt before me, all pleading the same thing. They hated their village chief so much they'd rather sell their girls to a stranger than let that man touch them. These girls were 13 or 14, too young for the government's mandatory marriage assignments. Once they came of age, families who couldn't pay taxes would lose their daughters anyway, sent to entertainment houses, forcibly married off, or worse, assigned to military camps. Tian Laoba pointed out we had single men in the village who'd make decent husbands, and suggested I take the girls in. I nodded, looking at the old man's daughter, a genuinely lovely girl. I thought about the household situation. Wan Xing was overwhelmed managing the accounts while also looking after me. Even a village chief's wife deserved household help. I needed a maid at minimum, and my standards were clear. Even for a servant, she had to be presentable. The girl had big, bright eyes full of spirit, though she was too scared to meet my gaze. Her grandfather said her name was Lu Yin. She couldn't read or do math. No poor family could afford that. But when I asked if she'd be willing to serve as my personal maid, both she and the old man were stunned. Nobody asks a servant if she's willing. She looked up at me for the first time. As long as I can eat and have somewhere to sleep, I'll do anything. That one sentence told me everything. Clever, cautious, humble. Exactly right for someone working close to me. I wrote up a contract, gave the old man 2 taels of silver and some grain, and took Lu Yin on. For the other families with daughters, I offered a different path. Come to Siwa village, and if any single men there caught their eye and the feeling was mutual, they could marry properly and become full villagers. No one was being sold or forced. Trading went on briskly. People brought property deeds, furniture, clay pots, whatever they had. I accepted everything, regardless of usefulness. This wasn't really commerce. It was giving desperate people an excuse to accept help without losing their dignity. Then a commotion broke out. An old man in his 50s appeared with a cane, flanked by 6 tough-looking men. Zhang Ermatzi, Shango's village chief. He started screaming about unauthorized gatherings, ordering his thugs to drive the villagers away and smash my stall. He accused me of stealing Shango's property, inciting unrest, and having sinister intentions. He demanded I leave my ox cart and grain behind as his property. Tian Laoba grabbed the old man's cane and confronted him. He pointed out this was technically Siwa village land. I owned the deeds, and we were conducting honest trade. But Zhang Ermatzi hid behind his official appointment, threatening that harming a county-designated village chief would bring consequences for all of Siwa village. I pulled Tian Laoba back gently and stepped forward myself. "You're the village chief?" He puffed up and told me to leave my goods and get out. I smiled. Then I let him see my real eyes, the ones that had made barbarian soldiers freeze and bandit leaders run. His thugs couldn't move, their legs locked under the weight of my killing intent. "You're a village chief. I'm a village chief. So hitting you is perfectly fair." I slapped him across the face. 3 gold teeth flew out along with a spray of blood. He sailed through the air and landed in the dirt, screaming about reporting me to the authorities. The Shango villagers who'd been shoved aside didn't leave. They'd been waiting for exactly this. Seeing their tormentor knocked flat, their faces lit up with joy. I crouched beside Zhang Ermatzi and whispered in his ear, "Want to report me?" You never wondered what happened to Wang Changsheng. He went pale. The mysterious disappearance of Siwa village's previous chief was well-known gossip. I told him plainly, take his family, move to the city, retire quietly, and he might die of old age. Otherwise, I'd heard Gao Lu Peak bandits were very active lately, the kind who wiped out entire families without blinking. Terror filled his eyes. He'd already heard the rumors that I'd absorbed Tian Weishan, that I had connections to bandits and possibly the county magistrate himself. The math was simple. Zhang Ermatzi instantly crumbled. The man who'd been screaming like a slaughtered pig went quiet, grabbed his cane, and hobbled toward his sons. "Let's go." Now he fled. Typical bully, fierce against the helpless, a coward against anyone with real strength. Even Wang Changsheng had more backbone. With him gone, the villagers' eyes shone with admiration. The trading continued until evening. We exchanged over half a cartload of grain for property deeds, household goods, and a batch of new recruits for Lin Xiaoxi's guard training. I brought Lu Yin home and handed her to Wan Qing. Then I went to find Wang Dinglu. Zhang Ermatzi might be a coward, but he was still a loose end. I needed to make sure he left without taking all those land deeds with him. When I came back, something felt off. My 3 wives were hovering around the kitchen with strange smiles. I asked where Lu Yin was. I pushed open the bedroom door. Steam hit my face. Lu Yin was standing in the wooden bathtub I'd built, completely flustered, having been told by my wives to prepare herself for me. Apparently the sisters and Shan Yue had gotten it into their heads that buying a maid meant. Well, the girl was barely 14. Still a child, really. "Put your clothes on," I said firmly, grabbing the outfit Wan Qing had prepared. She looked confused and hurt. "Master doesn't want me? My father said I should serve you well. The girls who went to the Zhang household said on the first night you have to." I cut her off. If I did that, how would I be any different from Zhang Ermatzi? Relief washed over her face. She sank back into the water with a quiet, grateful sound. Then she said softly that since I'd already seen her, she could never marry anyone else now. I told her we'd cross that bridge when she was older and truly willing, not just obedient. There's a difference between not resisting and actually wanting something. I stepped outside. 3 guilty faces stared at me in disbelief. Whose idea was this? Wan Qing stepped forward sheepishly, claiming she thought that's what buying a maid meant. I pretended to be angry. All 3 piled into my arms, apologizing and praising my virtue in the same breath. Shan Yue said she admired me even more now. I gave each of them a light smack and told them to make dinner. Lu Yin emerged dressed and composed, immediately jumping in to help cook. Our small table felt cramped with 5 people now. Looking at 4 beautiful faces watching me eat, I made a mental note to have Zhuzi build a bigger table. Something told me the household would only keep growing. The next morning, I took Xiang Yue to the horse farm where the guard patrol assembled. With the Shango recruits, the force now numbered 44. After a morning of training, I picked 6 of the quickest and handed them to Wang Dinglu to establish outer defense posts around the village perimeter. I divided the remaining guards into roles. 24 stayed under Lin Xiaoxi for daily village patrols in 3 shifts of 8. The rest went to Xiang Yue, who'd train them in coordinated combat and weapons handling. Their job was defending critical sites, the brick kiln, smithy, warehouses, and horse farm. With my personal inner circle added, Siwa village now had nearly 60 combat-ready fighters. Zhuzi came hauling a heavy crate with several helpers. He'd finished the wooden arrowheads I'd ordered, far faster than expected. On top of that, the village now had 5 wooden tank chariots and over 300 spear shafts just waiting for Zhang Tietsue's iron tips. The kid was a production machine. I rewarded him with a chicken from the stores and told him to go check out the single women I'd brought from Shango. He scratched his head shyly, saying no girl would want him. I slapped his muscular arm and told him women loved a strong, skilled man. He brightened up and promised to go look. His next assignment, shields. Not the small arm shields I'd seen the Fengling army use, but full-body tower shields tall enough to reach a man's chest and wide enough to crouch behind completely. They needed slots to brace spears through, a proper shield wall that could stop cavalry charges. Eventually, when I built muskets, these same shields would hold gun barrels, a firearm shield formation capable of sweeping armies. But that was the future. Zhuzi's eyes lit up at the new challenge, and he ran off to start designing. Then Wang Shan came sprinting over, clutching something and shouting. He'd been chopping trees deep in the mountains when he tripped over a rock buried in snow. He brought it to me, black, heavy as iron, with a glossy surface and faint red veins running through it. Black iron ore. High quality, too. My heart pounded. A single rock meant nothing, but if this came from a full vein, an unknown, unregistered deposit deep in our mountains, the possibilities were staggering. With enough ore, I could build blast furnaces and produce steel at industrial scale. Weapons, armor, tools, everything. I rushed to the smithy. Zhang Tietsue confirmed it immediately, premium black iron ore, better than what he'd been working with. Then his face turned serious. Village chief, this is excellent material, but all mineral deposits belong to the crown. Mining without imperial authorization is punishable by execution. Your entire clan wiped out. I knew the law. Every dynasty monopolized salt and iron. Unauthorized mining was treason. I'm aware. Don't worry about that part. Just tell me, if I gave you 5,000 gene of this, or how long to process it? His jaw nearly hit the floor. 5,000 gene was enough to equip an entire regiment. He calculated based on his furnace capacity, 100 gene per day maximum, yielding about half that in usable iron. 5,000 gene would take at least a month of non-stop work, assuming unlimited charcoal supply. The raw iron we smelted still needed a lot more work. Remelting, hammering, removing impurities, before it could become proper wrought iron. That's what we were using for the armor, and with cold forging, progress was painfully slow. I patted the blacksmith on the shoulder and told him to get ready. He'd have a busy winter ahead. After leaving the smithy, I sent Wang Shan with a few trusted men up the mountain to scout the ore vein. Then I hurried over to Wu Zhang's place. He'd been eating and sleeping since arriving at Siwa village. It was time he earned his keep. I laid out my plan. Frame Gao Lu Feng for the mining operation and use Wu Jiang as bait. He nearly lost his mind when he heard it. No concrete method, just a goal. I wanted him to figure out the details himself. After all, he used to run Tian Y Tian and knew Gao Lu Feng's people inside out. He tried to refuse, so I needled him about his so-called skills as a strategist. That got him going. He said he could do it, but only if I came along. I had no choice but to agree. Wu Jiang told me about Honda, Gao Lu Feng's second-in-command, a skilled fighter with a weakness for women. He'd been visiting a courtesan at the Yihong brothel in the county town regularly, always cautious, always scouting ahead. By Wu Jiang's count, his next visit would be in 2 days. Meanwhile, Wang Shan's team came back that evening with their report. It was a small ore vein, mostly buried under the mountain. I drew a simple map marking the surrounding terrain. The vein sat in a triangle between Siwa village, Shango village, and the county town. Further along that direction was Yangba village, the place where Gao Lufeng had stolen war horses, and beyond that, Gao Lufeng's stronghold on the vast Dragon Head mountain range. I put Wang Shan and Wang Dinglu on round-the-clock digging duty. Without proper mining tools, it was slow going, but I wasn't in a rush. On the third morning, Wu Jiang, Zhai Shanchuan, and I set out for the county town. We stopped by my father-in-law's place first. He'd already decided to move to Siwa village to help me and was packing up, just waiting for Mu Xiaoyang's next trip to the horse ranch. I left him some silver, and we moved on. That evening, the three of us walked through the doors of the Yihong brothel. What I didn't know was that right across the street, Long Ju, the military officer, was disguised as a woodcutter, staking out the place. He was there hunting for Honda and other bandit leaders who were supposedly planning to team up and raid barbarian camps for war horses. Instead of spotting his targets, he spotted me walking into a brothel. He nearly choked on his noodles. The man who'd just presented a brilliant strategy to the general was now strolling into a pleasure house. He couldn't believe his eyes. What I didn't know at the time was the chaos happening behind the scenes. Long Ju, that military officer disguised across the street, actually sent a carrier pigeon to General Linghu Xiaoshan with an urgent message. Lu Feng is visiting a brothel. A carrier pigeon. Those are meant for life-or-death military emergencies, and he wasted one on that. Apparently, when the general read it, she went through about a dozen expressions, burned the note, and ordered Long Ju to receive 100 strikes with the military rod when he returned. She told herself she didn't care. After all, what did it have to do with her? But from what I heard later, she punched her desk and cursed my name. Jibu, one of her 4 generals who happened to be in the tent, figured it out immediately. The general had real feelings for me. Back at the Yihong brothel, the three of us walked and dressed like wealthy young lords. Wu Jiang played the refined scholar up front. I looked like a steady nobleman, and Zhai Shanchuan passed as our bodyguard. The staff fawned over us immediately. A servant led us to a quiet spot with a good view and started chattering about a special new girl, a beauty with northern barbarian blood, exotic and stunning, and supposedly very expensive. That set off every alarm in my head. A woman with barbarian blood showing up on the exact same night that bandit leaders were gathering here to discuss a joint raid? Way too convenient. Something was wrong. I scanned the room. Up on the second floor, I caught a face half hidden behind a fan, Madame Wang. After her husband Wang Changsheng had divorced her over that whole ox cart incident and other family troubles, she'd ended up back at the brothel. Last time I saw her here, she'd been miserable. Now she was glaring at me with eyes that could kill. But when I looked closer, the real killing intent I'd sensed wasn't coming from her. It was something else, something far more dangerous, and it vanished before I could locate the source. I quietly touched the dagger at my side and checked the homemade grenades I'd brought along. This was supposed to be a risky operation, so I'd come prepared. Now I was glad I had. I smiled to myself. Tonight might get interesting. Meanwhile, Long Ju had also slipped inside the brothel in disguise, settling at a random table to keep an eye on me. He wanted to catch me doing something that would betray the general. But despite his careful costume, years of military bearing aren't easy to hide. I spotted him the moment he walked in. I figured he was here on his own mission, so I left him alone. Blowing his cover would only cause problems for both of us. After about 15 minutes of waiting, the front doors burst open and a dozen rough-looking men swaggered in, reeking of bandit energy. The madam of the brothel greeted Honda at the door like she'd been expecting him. Wu Jiang scanned the group and whispered to me. These weren't just Honda's men. They were bandit leaders from surrounding mountains. This wasn't a casual visit to see a woman. It looked like Gao Lufeng was trying to unite all the local bandits. Wu Jiang started getting nervous about how many enemies were around us, but I told him to stay calm and follow the plan. Meanwhile, I noticed Long Ju making his move too. He knocked out a servant in the kitchen, stole his clothes, and came back out disguised as a waiter. It was honestly pretty clumsy, but I already knew what he was doing. The whole strategy of spreading rumors about the barbarian camps had been my idea in the first place, and Long Ju was here to push that information to the bandit leaders. He dropped his surveillance of me to focus on his mission. Wu Jiang bribed a servant to get us into the private room right next to Honda's. I flashed a banknote, and the servant's attitude changed instantly. Suddenly, the reserved room was available after all. We went upstairs. Zhai Shanchuan guarded the door, while Wu Jiang and I pressed our ears against the wall. What we heard was alarming. The bandit leaders were praising Gao Lu Feng for raiding military horse camps and stealing supplies. Honda was rallying them to join forces, raid the barbarian camps together, seize weapons and horses, grow strong enough to stand against the Fengling army. One by one, the bandit chiefs pledged loyalty. Gao Lu Feng wasn't just building a gang anymore. They wanted to become a real power. Wu Jiang was shocked, but I figured this actually made things easier. These bandits were already greedy enough. I barely needed to bait them. Once the noise next door settled, Wu Jiang and I started our act. We talked loudly, pretending to be rich young men. I played the role of someone who discovered a high-quality iron or vein that the government didn't know about, and Wu Jiang played a wealthy friend I was inviting to invest. We made sure to mention how much money it would be worth. The room next door went dead silent. I knew they were listening. An iron or vein meant unlimited weapons and silver, far easier than fighting barbarians for scraps. Every bandit chief in that room was probably already scheming how to take it for themselves. Honda was the first to rush out the door. That was our cue to leave. But just then, the brothel announced the arrival of their new star, the exotic beauty with barbarian blood, Xiangxiang. Flower petals rained down, and every eye in the building turned toward her. I knew we had to move now, before Honda circled back and cornered us. Wu Jiang checked the window, but bandits were scattered everywhere below. If we climbed out, we'd cause a scene, and one shout from Honda would get us surrounded. I glanced around and knew the situation was bad. I could handle myself in a fight, but dragging Wu Jiang along would be trouble. When I opened the door, both sides of the corridor were already blocked by bandits. I immediately put on a curious expression and leaned on the railing, pretending to watch the show downstairs like everyone else. Wu Jiang whispered nervously, asking if we could still get out. I told him to stay calm and play the part of spectators. My plan was simple. When the moment came, Zhai Shanchuan would clear a path to the right while I drew the main group away. If they couldn't fight through, I told them to surrender. As long as they stayed alive, I'd find a way to get them out. The odds were terrible. Nearly 30 bandits inside the brothel alone, plus more outside. Every chief who'd rushed out of the meeting room had called for backup, and more kept arriving. Our original plan had only accounted for Honda. Nobody expected this many gang leaders gathering at once. Rotten luck. The only thing saving us was Honda's weakness. The moment Xiangxiang appeared, his eyes locked onto her and nothing else existed. She was stunning, I'll admit. Exotic features, deep eyes, flawless figure, moving like something out of a dream. Every bandit in the building was hypnotized, but I'd seen plenty of beautiful women in my past life, running missions overseas. She didn't cloud my thinking. Honda's regular woman showed up and tried to get his attention by pretending to trip in the corridor. He didn't even look at her, just waved his hand and told someone to drag her away, threatening to kill anyone who interrupted his view. That was my chance. I nudged Wu Jiang, snapping him out of his daze, and the three of us started moving toward the staircase. Then Xiangxiang made her announcement. She said this was her first night, and she'd choose one lucky man to spend it with. How? She'd dance, and when she finished, whoever her finger pointed at would be the chosen one. The place erupted. Every bandit suddenly forgot about the iron or forgot about their alliance. All they cared about was being picked. Some spread out to isolated spots, thinking it would improve their chances. Honda just coughed loudly and cleared a wide space around himself. Nobody dared stand near him. The music started and Xiangxiang began to dance. She was graceful and mesmerizing, light as a bird, silk floating around her. The tempo picked up, then slowly wound down. Her hand began sweeping across the crowd, her finger passing face after face, getting slower and slower. Honda's heart was practically in his throat. He was sure she'd pick him, but he'd forgotten one small detail. Standing just 2 people away from him, completely calm and unbothered, was me. Sure enough, Xiangxiang's finger passed right over Honda and stopped on me. Honda couldn't believe it. He stared, rubbed his eyes, then rage took over. He threw a punch at me, probably thinking he'd beat the location out of me later and take Xiangxiang for himself. I smiled, caught his fist with one hand, and tossed it aside like it was nothing. He swung again, same result. I nearly sent him stumbling. The other bandit chiefs watched in disbelief, which only humiliated him more. He was about to go all out when Xiang called up from below, reminding him of the promise he'd just made. His fist went limp instantly. The man truly thought with nothing but his lower half. He couldn't even see that Xiang was playing him like a puppet. I also noticed something useful. Not a single bandit here recognized me. That was good. Honda backed off with a threat, and Xiang extended her hand to me, asking if I'd like to join her in her private room. Every man in the building stared daggers at me, silently begging me to refuse. I accepted, of course, but I wasn't fooled. I'd watched her dance carefully. Every movement was precisely controlled. She'd chosen me on purpose, not by chance. This whole thing was aimed at me from the start. I'd encountered female assassins in my past life, but this was my first time meeting one in this world. Interesting. She took my hand and led me toward the stairs. The moment her fingers touched mine, I could tell the softness and warmth were calculated to melt any man's willpower. It didn't work on me. Instead, I pulled my hand free, wrapped my arm around her waist, and drew her close against me. She let out a little gasp of surprise, but didn't resist. She pressed closer, thinking she'd already won me over. Honda nearly exploded. He ordered his men to surround the place and kill me the moment I came out. He even put a bounty on my head, 30 silver for whoever took it, extra for eyes, ears, or other parts. Down below, Long Ju watched me disappear with Xiang and shook his head in disgust, muttering that the general had picked the wrong man and that I was nothing but a womanizer. Then he sighed and went back to trailing Honda. Xiang brought me to her room, freshly decorated, wine and food already laid out, everything prepared ahead of time. She sat me down, poured wine, and deliberately brushed my fingers with hers, putting on a shy act. I went along with the performance, though honestly it was exhausting. Did she really think this kind of thing would work on me? In my past life, someone pulling these moves would have gotten a bullet, not a blush. She picked up a small horsehead fiddle and began playing while she danced. I watched with genuine appreciation. She was talented, I'll give her that. The tempo quickened. Her body spun closer and closer to me until she fell into my arms. She whispered, asking if I thought her dancing was beautiful, if it satisfied me, if she was truly stunning enough to topple kingdoms. I played my part and told her it was the most enchanting dance I'd ever seen. She pressed a finger to my lips, then slowly leaned in, her red lips moving toward mine. The embrace, the kiss. I'd seen this routine 100 times in my past life. I knew exactly what was coming. While her lips moved toward mine, her other hand was reaching behind her back for a weapon, a special dagger hidden behind the horsehead fiddle. She'd drawn it when she pressed against me, and her next move was to stab me under the arm. The blade flashed. I was already ready. I caught her wrist effortlessly, and her eyes went wide with shock. I smiled and told her she was too eager. Then I twisted hard. The crack of bone was loud and clear. Her wrist snapped. She kept fighting with her good hand, so I threw her across the room. She tried to get up. I pinned her down and demanded answers. Who sent her? Why kill me? She wouldn't say a word no matter what I did. Tough girl. It took a long time and a lot of pressure before I got anything out of her. She'd been sent to kill me to find out the location of some account ledger. As for who was behind it, she died without giving up a single name. She was clearly a trained assassin, raised and groomed by someone powerful. Her looks, her dancing skills, none of that came from a small place like Wenhuang County. I got dressed, straightened myself up, and walked out. Honda and his men were crowded at the staircase. They'd heard all the noise from inside and assumed we'd been having a passionate time. None of them suspected what had actually happened. Honda demanded to know what I'd done with his beauty. I told him she was inside, as a corpse. He didn't process it at first, thought I was taunting him, and flew into a rage. He ordered his men to kill me, but I wasn't focused on them. My eyes were on two servants near the staircase, the ones who'd come with Xiang. They'd been guarding the door the whole time, and when I walked out alive, surprise flashed across their faces. That told me everything. They knew I was supposed to die in that room. Honda's men charged me in the narrow corridor. I drew my dagger and went to work. The hallway only fit 3 people at a time. Their numbers meant nothing. In moments, 7 or 8 bodies lay on the floor, still bleeding. Not a drop of blood on me. Honda watched his men fall apart, like clay figures, and panicked. He cursed, turned around, shoved past his own people, and ran downstairs. The other bandit chiefs followed, screaming at their underlings to hold me off while they escaped. I chased after them, but they weren't my real targets. I was following the two servants. They slipped out the front door and ducked into the dark alley beside the brothel. Long Ju, still downstairs in his waiter disguise, saw the chaos, bandits fleeing, me cutting through them like a war god, and rushed upstairs to investigate. I followed the two servants into the alley. The moment I stepped in, a wave of killing intent hit me head-on. Doors creaked open on both sides, and from the darkness emerged over 20 figures in matching black clothes, all carrying identical long swords, all radiating murderous energy. Professional killers. I stopped and looked around. Surrounded. This whole thing had been a trap within a trap, and there was a second wave of assassins waiting for me. I stood still in the dark alley, studying the assassins. Every one of them was disciplined and well-trained, clearly elite fighters. Xiang had been the first wave, and these killers were the backup in case she failed. They were likely dead soldiers belonging to one of the 8 great eunuchs, men at the very top of the power structure, each with their own private army of expendable warriors. The two servants I'd chased ran to a tall man in black, their leader. He wore a wide hat and a mask, and without a word, he drew his sword and cut both servants' heads off for failing the mission. These people didn't tolerate weakness. The leader demanded I hand over the account ledger. I asked him a question first. How did they know I'd be at the Ehome brothel tonight? Only a few people knew my plans. If someone had leaked my movements, finding the traitor mattered more than anything else. He laughed and refused to answer, mocking the small clay pot in my hand. He gave the order to attack. Over 20 black-clad killers drew their blades and charged. I waited until the fuse on my grenade burned down, then tossed it into the crowd and ducked behind cover. The explosion was devastating. Iron pellets and nails ripped through them. More than half went down screaming. The survivors froze in shock. I lit a second grenade and rolled it along the ground. Another blast. The remaining few who were unhurt didn't dare move forward. I picked up a fallen sword, charged in, and cut them all down. The leader had survived. His men had shielded him from most of the shrapnel. He staggered to his feet, terrified, demanding to know what that weapon was. These were elite assassins who'd never failed a mission, who'd even infiltrated the Imperial Palace, and a single small device had nearly wiped them out. I walked through the alley slowly, finishing off the wounded one by one. When only the leader remained, I drove the sword through his hand and asked my questions again. He tried to bite down on poison hidden in his teeth, the classic dead soldier trick, but I was faster. I grabbed his jaw and stuffed a rag in his mouth. I'd save him alive and hand him over to General Linghu Shaoshan for proper interrogation. Long Ju's soldiers showed up, drawn by the explosions. I recognized 2 of them as his personal guards and told them to handle the scene. Then I headed back to the brothel and ran into Long Ju at the entrance. He demanded to know why I'd killed Xiang. I told him she was an assassin who'd come specifically to kill me. He didn't believe me, so I pointed him toward the alley full of bodies. I told him to check for survivors and deliver any live ones to my wife for questioning. Then I dumped the whole mess on him to clean up. Inside the brothel, the customers had all fled after the chaos. Only the madam and her staff remained, cleaning up the carnage. The madam stormed toward me with fury on her face. I slapped her hard enough to spin her around twice. Then I asked my question, who arranged for Xiang to come to the Ehome brothel? The assassin leader wouldn't talk, so I'd have to trace the leak myself. The people at the bottom might not know who was truly behind all this, but someone here knew how my movements had been betrayed. Just as I finished speaking, I heard something drop behind me. I turned and saw a familiar face, Madame Wang. The moment our eyes met, she dropped what she was holding and ran. That was as good as a confession. I caught her in a few steps, grabbed her by the hair, and threw her into the middle of the hall. I pressed my dagger to her throat and asked if she was the one who'd given away my movements. She exploded, screaming that everything was my fault, that she'd had a good life before I ruined it, that she'd still be living in comfort at the Wang household if not for me. She said someone had come to the brothel asking about me, and she'd jumped at the chance for revenge. She'd cooperated with them without hesitation. She cursed me, swore she'd haunt me as a ghost. I pressed the blade. She died. I didn't feel much about it. Then a thought hit me. Where were Wu Jiang and Jai Shanchuan? I found out from Long Ju's soldiers that the two of them had been captured by the fleeing bandits. At least they'd been smart enough to surrender immediately, so they weren't hurt. I borrowed a fast horse from Long Ju and rode hard after them. I caught up outside the city. The bandit chiefs had split in different directions, and Honda was running down a side path with only 5 or 6 men. Wu Jiang spotted me first and kicked Zhai Shanchuan into action. Zhai Shanchuan broke free, cut his ropes using an enemy's own blade, and hacked Honda across the shoulder. Between Zhai Shanchuan and me, the remaining bandits were finished in seconds. Honda scrambled away into the forest. I let him go on purpose. I needed him alive. If he died, there'd be no one to take the blame and lead Gao Lu Feng into my trap. Wu Jiang confirmed he'd done his part. While captured, he'd told the bandits everything about the iron ore, even drew them a detailed map with the exact location marked. Mission accomplished. He asked about Xiangxiang. I told him she'd been an assassin sent by someone in the imperial court, and I'd killed her. Wu Jiang was shocked, then immediately started thinking it through. The real question was, who leaked the information about the account ledger? Madame Wang could only have betrayed my location. She knew nothing about the ledger. Without someone revealing the ledger's existence, the court wouldn't have sent assassins in the first place. Wu Jiang quickly declared he wasn't the spy, which was smart of him. He knew suspicion could fall anywhere. I told him not to worry. It wasn't him, Zhai Shanchuan, or anyone from Siwa village. If villagers had leaked it, the assassins would have gone straight to the village to seize my family as leverage, not set an elaborate ambush at a brothel in the county town. The fact that they'd resorted to waiting and hoping I'd show up meant they had very limited intelligence. I thought it through carefully. Only a handful of people knew about the ledger, some in Siwa village and those present at the Fengling army camp when I discussed it with General Linghu Shaoshan. Since Siwa village was ruled out, the leak had to have come from inside the military camp. The people present that day were the general herself and her 4 Wind Forest Fire Mountain generals. I could eliminate Linghu Shaoshan and Long Ju immediately. As for the other 3, I couldn't be sure about any of them.